Bang! The ornate wooden door was thrown open, and James Potter strode in. "This is Malfoy Manor's law enforcement department, not your stinking loo on Cliff Street," Barty Crouch Jr. said coldly as he looked up from a pile of paperwork. The office was huge. Wizards and witches worked at desks, while Dobby and several Muggles knelt on the floor cleaning or hauled heavy files in and out. Everyone glanced up at the commotion. A Hogwarts student was attacked, and the attacker was your Malfoy house elf. James said, wand in hand, not the least intimidated by Barty's reputation. "I want a proper explanation. If I don't get one, the next person standing at Malfoy Manor won't be me. It'll be Dumbledore." A wash of magic rolled off him. The polished floor tiles wavered, and the chandelier above creaked as transfiguration power surged through the room. Though many remembered Mrs. Potter for her potion skills, James was a veteran of the Order of the Phoenix, a skilled transfigurer and a dangerous duelist. If Barty didn't give him a satisfactory answer, it wouldn't take long for word of the Order raiding Malfoy Manor to spread. "This is a serious accusation, Mr. Potter. You need to present evidence before you speak," Barty replied, rising. A staff carved from a pale bone, like Lucius's, appeared in his hand. Magic invisible to ordinary eyes emanated from him too, smoothing out the distortions James's anger had caused. It was obvious, though, that maintaining that hold cost him. Against James's raw power and experience, Barty's defenses looked strained. Outside the door, a group of security wizards barreled in, some still hobbling awkwardly because James's transfiguration had affected their legs. They had tried to stop him, but his breakthrough had been easy. They pointed their wands at James and swore under their breath as they tried to reverse the spells, but they were not aurors, only gatekeepers with limited skill. "I recognize the elf. That's Dobby." "He's a Malfoy Dobby," James said. "After Lucius was imprisoned, Dobby should have been seized and sent to the Public Services Department. He shouldn't be out on Cliff Street attacking a child." "You're making a very serious claim," Barty said. "Do you have any evidence?" James didn't worry about Barty calling for proof. In the wizarding world, a person's memory could be extracted and placed in a pensieve. That was as good as any courtroom exhibit. He knew Dumbledore could prod for the truth later. He expected Barty to try to dodge. Instead, Barty frowned and asked, "What did you call the attacker? Dobby?" He rifled through the papers on his desk and handed James a single sheet. James took it warily. It was a wanted poster. A magical portrait of Dobby stared out, his large eyes darting nervously. "This Dobby escaped from the Public Services Department in early July," Barty said, voice flat. "We've issued a warrant for his arrest." "That's impossible. No house elf has ever broken a contract," James said, incredulous. "This is a Malfoy Dobby," Barty retorted. "With an ancient family like the Malfoys, who knows what odd magics they keep? It wouldn't be impossible for one of their house elves to run." "What about Lucius? He's imprisoned in your dungeon, isn't he? Interrogate him. A house elf acts under a master's orders. If Malfoy Manor doesn't have his contract now, who does?" James demanded. "Mr. Potter, understand this. You are not my superior, and you have no authority to order me around," Barty said coldly. "And don't assume we haven't questioned everyone. The dungeon guards and the two-faced monster can both testify that the moment Dobby disappeared, I went straight to the dungeon. Getting a former speaker to speak is no easy task. Besides, every wizard at Malfoy Manor holds multiple posts. We can't spare half the staff to chase one dangerous apparating house elf." Barty sounded satisfied with his answer. He had expected this scenario ever since Lucius's imprisonment and had planned accordingly. Before Dobby had ever been taken down to the dungeon, Barty had already arranged the illusion that Dobby had escaped from public services. He had concealed Dobby's presence in the dungeon, so any record of Dobby being there could later be presented as proof that he had been properly detained. As director of law enforcement, Barty knew how to use paperwork and procedure to clear his hands. "So you're just going to let it be? Let this Dobby run free to go on plotting how to murder a student who isn't even into their second year?" James snapped. "Watch your tone, Mr. Potter," Barty said, half mocking. "We've issued a warrant. Any wizard who finds, captures, or kills this Dobby will be rewarded with the bounty. As for protecting Hogwarts students, that's the professor's responsibility. Malfoy Manor's jurisdiction is Wiltshire, not the whole wizarding world." He shrugged. Besides, I don't believe any adult wizard would risk being wanted just to help a house elf escape in order to kill a child. This is probably just the independent act of a foolish, impulsive house elf. James sneered. No matter how prettily you phrase it, Dobby vanished from Malfoy Manor. That much is indisputable. Since you can't or won't bring him in, Dumbledore will hear about this. He turned and left. The wizards who had blocked the doorway stepped aside, not daring to stop him. "Oh, Dumbledore, the mighty Dumbledore," Barty called after him with a drawl. "We'll be terrified. We'll send the head of the Public Services Department and the supervisor of house elves to Hogwarts to apologize. Please forgive the misdeeds of these dirty creatures." James clenched his fists and kept walking. He was no longer a boy at school. There was no point wasting time on words. Although their attempt to get answers at Malfoy Manor had failed, Cliff Street remained electrified with life. Hermione's Spirit Soul Pact ritual had dramatically reduced the radiation in Godric's Hollow, and because no one was sure whether the change was permanent, expedition teams hurriedly organized more searches. Cellars in many wizard families were opened and cartloads of pre-war goods were hauled back. Most of the items weren't worth much when they were first stored, but after 50 years, they could be traded for far more at Malfoy Manor. Potion ingredients, food, clothing, metals, and even some high-level processed goods were recovered. The old Potter house, alas, had been too close to the blast to survive. It was almost completely ruined. James didn't find the portrait he'd hoped for. His only tangible prize was an original Potter family shampoo recipe kept in a delicate box. Its value was mostly sentimental. Cliff Street felt like Christmas. People laughed and joked, and trade was brisk. They even organized a small, raucous Quidditch match after discovering some returned brooms still flew. The pitch was set above the concave pit in the middle of the street, using antique brooms that should have been retired decades ago, and the golden snitch they used was an actual antique, the world's first golden snitch. Oddly, the snitch's scoring essence and its physical body had separated during whatever strange magics it had endured. The scoring aspect had become an independent spirit under contract to Hermione, while the ancient snitch itself had been co-opted as Hermione's external energy core and still zipped about like a snitch, evading seekers with the same sly speed as ever. In the end, James's red team, with him as seeker, squeaked past Harry's blue team. James plucked the snitch right in front of Harry with a long reach and a grin, and Harry was so furious he skipped dinner that night. Afterwards, the snitch was returned to Hermione, rightfully hers. Without her, Cliff Street's recovery would have progressed much more slowly, and everyone treated her with quiet respect. Even Muggles handed her roasted sweet potatoes with enthusiasm. Life on the street had improved, and everyone had benefited. Publicly, the story was simple. The expedition used Shining Stone magic to force a careful, limited exploration of the valley's hazardous center. Privately, James, acting as secret keeper, cast the Fidelius charm to hide the rest. The ritual Hermione had performed wasn't easily repeatable. It needed something conceptually precious as an anchor, and what people called the radiation-absorbing effect had been a side effect of signing a contract with a spirit. Even if Hermione tried to make a ritual purely for energy absorption, she would still need an object of symbolic worth, something like the world's first golden snitch, to hold the turbulent radiation and convert it into more stable Shining Stone energy. For now, Hogwarts looked like the only place in the world that might be able to manage environmental radiation reliably, so every power was trying to curry favor with Dumbledore in hopes the technique could one day be shared. News that Godric's Hollow had been cleared would make Hermione a wanted person. Nobles and power brokers might not be gentle about making her cooperate. That was another reason for secrecy. Life settled back into a cautious normal. 2 unopened barrels of wizard golden brew sold for a fortune at Malfoy Manor. A large share of the gold went straight into buying potion ingredients for Lily. Once a potion master worked them into finished draughts, they would fetch even greater sums. Lily had become Cliff Street's cash cow. It was, in a sense, exploitative. Mrs. Potter had earned her skills through talent and effort and owed the street nothing, but she was happy to support her husband's rebuilding efforts. The reconstruction committee did not expect her to work for free. They operated on a profit-sharing basis, though to outsiders it still looked like Lily was losing money. Under Lily's firm supervision, Professor Mom, as the students joked, Harry, Ron, and Neville had been mass-producing anti-radiation potions. Most of the batch went to expedition members. Teams planned to use inciting sprays to disperse the potion across the valley, accelerating the neutralization. There was hope that, bit by bit, life could return to ancestral houses, though it would be a long, difficult project. No one knew how the current crops and animals would fare when moved outdoors, or how to adapt to variable weather. Everything required careful testing and adjustment. Hermione had learned to brew polyjuice potion, but it took a month to make a single dose, so she'd probably only be able to attempt one full transformation over the summer. During the break, for Harry's birthday, Sirius and Lupin visited the Potters, accompanied by Mr. and Mrs. Longbottom, who had returned from Arctic duties. They smothered Neville with hugs and kisses. Mrs. Weasley, satisfied that Ron wasn't in danger, refrained from sending a howler. It was Hermione's first time meeting a werewolf. Lupin was polite, witty, and wise, though he looked a little drawn and very pale. Thanks to Lily's regularly supplied, custom-improved wolfsbane potion, he'd regained enough control to weather full moons safely, something wandering, wild werewolves could hardly dream of. There had been a terrifying period when werewolf rampages were widespread. Without effective organization, the infection had spread until everyone was at risk. Lupin had been infected during that time. Many wild werewolves still roamed and preferred to infect rather than merely kill, seeming to take a crueler pleasure in making others like them. Those atrocities prompted a brutal, three-way counteroffensive by wizards, muggles, and goblins that eventually checked the worst of the violence. It was also during those years that most of the werewolves who later served Lord Voldemort were recruited. Sirius and Lupin brought other news. "I heard Dumbledore's found a professor for the reversal of anti-wizard techniques," Lupin told the table. "And he'll be Dean of Slytherin as well." "Madame Pomfrey can finally take a break," Sirius added. "It's getting on for her to run a whole ward of energetic kids. Who could be acceptable to both Dumbledore and those nobles?" James asked between mouthfuls of steak. "You'll see soon enough," Sirius said with a secretive wink at Lily and Hermione. "I think you'll all like him very much." School letters from Owls used to arrive before the holidays ended, listing textbooks and equipment. Now the Owl Post was defunct, and many Muggle families couldn't afford everything, so that step had been skipped. No one knew yet who the new professor would be or what books would be required. Those answers would come at term start. The children didn't worry about missing classes. Whoever the new professor was, they intended to attend. What they were most excited about, though, was the shopping trip their mother had promised at Malfoy Manor before the holidays ended. As September 1st drew near, the kids grew restive and started making mistakes in potion class. Seeing this, Mrs. Potter decided there was only one cure for their nerves. "Tomorrow," she announced, "we're all going to Malfoy Manor to shop." Malfoy Manor, sitting on the gentle plains of Wiltshire, had once been only the Malfoy family's private estate. After the war, however, a generation of nobles pooled their resources and raised a low, artificial hill. The flat top became the inner city, hidden behind a mist-like barrier. It served as the residential quarter for pureblood nobility and used the same enchantment as the ceiling of Hogwarts' Great Hall, always the most perfect sky, immaculate lawns, and abundant water. Below the hill, strange houses spread out in a patchwork to form the outer city of Malfoy Manor. A long, low stone wall, barely a person's height but steeped in old magic, circled the outer city. It looked simple and fragile, but it was laced with ancient inherited curses. Anyone who trespassed within its bounds without permission suffered a cruel, inescapable death. Those walls were part of the barrier that protected the place. In a previous war with Muggles, Malfoy Manor had relied on those cursed stones, withstood saturation bombardment, and counterattacked strongly. Despite lacking high battlements, it had become the foremost gathering place in the world. Only those qualified to live within the walls, at least as residents of the outer city, were considered citizens of Malfoy Manor and entitled to its protection. That privilege came with a heavy tax, and land nearer the inner city was worth exponentially more. The noble districts had been painstakingly treated with anti-radiation potion. Every inch of the inner city was expensive in both money and magic. The closer to the center, the lower the radiation and the healthier the environment. That also explained why Draco, who had grown up in the inner city, had such weak resistance to radiation. Hermione could easily overpower him. The outer city, by contrast, was the liveliest quarter, hosting nearly half of the European wizarding world. Its shops moved staggering volumes of goods, generating immense wealth for the inner city's nobles. In scale and bustle, the outer city rivaled, perhaps even surpassed, Diagon Alley in its heyday. Gringotts had even relocated there and reproduced a section of Diagon Alley itself. Outside the stone wall were many more dwellings, ramshackle huts of wood and stone where impoverished wizards who couldn't afford the entry fee and muggles desperate to join the manor eked out a survival. They had no formal protection, but living near the wall offered indirect security from mutated beasts, muggles, and werewolves. Human nature being what it was, a robbery, disappearance, or death out there would typically go unremarked. Slavery, for some, was preferable to being dragged off by a monster or starving in the wastes. The climate of the whole manor was regulated by a dozen weather wizards who could keep blizzards and acid rain at bay and hold temperatures within a tolerable range year-round. That required a tremendous amount of magic power, and only Malfoy Manor had the resources to allow a whole city to live on the surface. Still, not even all those wizards could disperse the thick dust clouds that hung over the land. A stubborn goblin curse kept the sky grim for long stretches, and clearing it lasted only briefly, even with the wizards' rotating shifts. Ultimately, the most expensive thing to maintain was the inner city's ecological dome: permanent sun, clean air and water, and uncontaminated food and magical ingredients. Cliff Street fed into Malfoy Manor's network of fireplaces at the outer city's gate, a stone archway. There were several such archways to ease traffic. Other wizarding factions could not simply walk past the outer wall. After emerging from a fireplace, one still had to pass inspection at the gate, register, and pay the entrance tax. Of course, a male wizard like James could storm through, scowling, and turn anyone who tried to stop him into a chair. The stone wall's curses, in any case, were aimed more at muggles and low-level intruders. When Hermione and her group came through the fireplace, what they found was not the expected merry bustle. The gate, which should have been crowded and lively, felt tense and anxious. Potter stepped forward to look. Lily kept the 4 children beside her close, shielding them from the press. Inside the archway, there was confusion and the occasional wail. 2 gate wardens in standard security robes stood at the entrance, their faces tight, checking everyone who tried to enter. Slower arrivals were barked at and shoved along. "It's the Green Flame Party," a man in merchant's clothes explained as he joined them. He was travel-worn, wearing a neat suit and a high-brimmed hat, a briefcase enlarged by an extension charm at his side. Seeing Hermione and the others' relatively fine dress, he leaned in and lowered his voice. Voldemort's people infiltrated Malfoy Manor. They kidnapped many of the children who were supposed to start Hogwarts this year. He pointed toward a breached section of the wall. A dozen heavily armed wizards ringed the area, while a few construction specialists worked hurried charms to mend the stone. A huge basilisk burst out of the outer city, smashed through the wall, and carried off the abducted children, right in front of everyone, the merchant said. They say a dozen died, most of them Muggle servants. "The Green Flame Party's getting bolder," a voice grumbled nearby. "Last year they did it on the sly. This year they just take them in the open. If Malfoy Manor can't protect us, can't protect our children, what's the point of paying such taxes?" The crowd buzzed with anger and fear until a guard's stare silenced them. Everyone wanted in. No one knew whether that basilisk would find its way back. "It's almost time for term to start," Hermione murmured. The acceptance quills, once seized by Lord Voldemort, were starting to work again, but how many of this year's children would escape the demon's grasp? "They even sent a basilisk this time," she added, recalling that when they'd been pursued before, it had been a Death Eater from the Green Flame Party, no basilisk. Perhaps that had been their luck. "The professors will rescue them, like last year," Harry said, firm. Neville, standing beside him, only moved his lips. He knew better than anyone how few of the children from his own abduction had been saved. The Potters waited a long time in line before they reached the inspection desk. "Name. First time? Is your wand registered?" the scribe demanded, scribbling in a ledger without looking up. "Muggle-borns pay an extra fee. If you don't have coin, you can sign an indenture." His companion nudged him hard, and he glanced up straight into the cool, impassive faces of Lily and James. The man recognized them immediately, one a Potter renowned as a potion master across the wizarding world, the other the fellow who had recently humiliated him. The sight made the registrar's knees go weak. He plastered a fawning smile on his face and bowed over the table. "Oh my, Mr. Potter, Miss Lily, please come in, please." "Raise the barrier. Do you still intend to charge a potion master?" James said. Even though the brown-haired girl with them looked like a bumpkin and was clearly a mudblood, the registrar dared not make trouble. He let them through without collecting the entrance tax. From the gate, the outer city was in turmoil. Families who had lost children pressed their claims, and workers slowly repaired houses crushed in the basilisk's path. Yet, when Hermione glanced up toward the hill, the inner city seemed untouched. Through the shimmering veil, she could see an eternally spring-like landscape, white peacocks wandering the lawns, and noble children wheeling about on tiny toy brooms. The peaceful scene inside the mist made the chaos below feel all the more raw. The tragedy had caused a degree of chaos, but it hadn't stopped the steady stream of shoppers in New Diagon Alley. The Potters had brought their children. Lily handed the kids to James. "You take them and do the shopping. I need to speak with a few families about the final payments and the next orders. We'll meet at the ice cream parlor later." Lily was a practical, strong woman. She had come to Malfoy Manor for work. Both James and the Cliff Street Committee had entrusted the potions business entirely to her. New Diagon Alley was laid out like old London streets. A long, gently sloping lane that led down from the high ground where Gringotts reared up in stern grandeur. Rumor said it differed from the original Diagon Alley, but it was unmistakably the prime shopping district of Malfoy Manor. Every shop here was a treasure, and outrageously expensive. Money was no object for the Potters. Even without counting Lily's potion earnings, the family's successful shampoo business meant they could spend freely. Wizards, Muggles, and house elves mingled on the busy street, though Muggles and house elves mostly moved behind their masters as servants. Wizards held the dominant position. Despite being fewer in number, Muggles existed in a vassal role, doing work no different from house elves, if less formally. As they walked, Hermione noticed cauldron shops, bookstores, clothing stores, and a wand shop called Oakland, an obvious nod to the old Ollivanders. The craftsmanship in Oakland was ornate, wands exquisitely carved with gem inlays and interchangeable handles, but their performance was unreliable. In day-to-day use, the cores could pop out, or in worst cases, the wand might explode. They were fashionable showpieces more than practical tools. Nobles loved them for ceremonial occasions, a chance to show off custom designs and outdo one another. It was said that when Lucius Malfoy's home was raided, his 13 fashion wands were fought over by rival families. A broomstick shop caught their attention, but 4 stern wizards stood at the door, watching anyone who glanced at the display as if ready to seize them. Free flight was a difficult skill in the wizarding world. Most wizards relied on brooms or flying carpets. Apparition was fast but risky and could only send you to places you'd been before. Misjudge it, and you might get splinched. Flying purely by magic was rarer still, a combat-level skill. These days, brooms were valued almost as military hardware. Rare materials meant powers prioritized supplying their own wizard regiments. Even the civilian models, like the much-talked-about Nuclear Ring 2000, were stripped down, civilianized versions with many combat features. Flying on a broom in the wild now usually meant you were headed into danger. That made broomsticks a major luxury item. Getting one was a cause for celebration, even fireworks. In that light, the 30 brooms Malfoy Manor had given Hogwarts were a significant and ongoing expense that hurt many families. Harry and the 2 boys lingered at the broom shop window for a long time, but they knew pestering their father for a broom was pointless. They contented themselves with staring at the displays, joined by a dozen other kids. The guards tolerated the children but kept grown-ups well back from the glass. Hermione had little interest in brooms. Her gravity magic was improving. However high someone flew, she could grab and pin them. She wanted to browse Flourish and Blots next door, but James warned her that books were valuables here, and not to be opened inside the shop. They could only be inspected after purchase. Hermione thought it was a ripoff. Who knew whether those gold-plated, silver-edged tomes contained anything but hot air? She also saw the headquarters of the post-war spell research journal, but didn't recognize any of the old wizards, so she didn't go in. From the fork in New Diagon Alley, a turn could lead to the adjacent New Nocturne Alley, a reproduction of the old Grey Market Street, now remade for nobles. From between the pointed roofs, Hermione could see the tall sign of Borgin and Burke's. Most nocturne shops were membership only, catering to elegant, wealthy, and powerful families. Transactions were private and protected by anti-detection charms, so nobody knew what changed hands inside. Hermione's current soul-summoning bell had almost certainly come from there. How much Lucius had paid the Borgins for it was anyone's guess. Borgin and Burke's, once traders in dark artifacts, had successfully reinvented themselves as a legitimate fence for noble families, consigning petty black market operators to the gutters. James took the children along the street to buy their school supplies. He bought Harry a new telescope and got Ron and Neville Quick Notes quills, the Truth Edition. These quills varied by maker. If the scribe who enchanted them was prone to vanity or gossip, the quills would add filler or distortions. Picking the right one took care. Hermione received a wand maintenance toolkit. James had wanted to buy her a decorative lady's hat with changeable adornments, but Hermione balked at the price and chose the practical toolset instead. Her wand was long and thick and needed real upkeep. They stopped at Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions and ordered several new outfits for each child. The school provided robes, but parents who could afford it preferred to buy better ones. James didn't forget Lily either. He picked out a new dress for his wife. Ron, flushed and grateful, thanked him quietly. His family had so many children that clothes were always hand-me-downs. For Hermione and the others, this was their first time in brand-new, freshly scented robes. They sat in the ice cream parlor, savoring their treats while they waited for Lily. Hermione opened the box of candies Dumbledore had given her and mixed Bertie Bott's every flavor beans into the cream. Everyone dove in, enjoying the thrill of not knowing whether the next bean would taste of chocolate or earwax. A sudden commotion erupted down the street. From the ice cream parlor window, Hermione could see a crowd gathered at the city gate where the slope ended. Shouts rose in a swell of excitement. The others craned their necks but couldn't make anything out. Harry, who still had his new telescope, extended the brass tube and trained it on the distant crowd. 85, an unexpected encounter. Look who that is! It's Gilderoy Lockhart! Harry cried. Before he could say more, Hermione snatched up the telescope. A devoted fan of Lockhart, she had always regretted never having had the chance to meet the famed Ranger Wizard in person. The first-year defense against the dark arts textbook, Countering Danger, a Wasteland Survival Guide, was one of Lockhart's less popular works, but even that single volume had convinced her of his deep knowledge, formidable skill, and elegant prose. She had been counting the days until second year, when a revised edition of the Dada textbook would be issued, an augmented copy not yet in circulation, and now, at last, she might see the author himself. Thanks to the telescope, Hermione got a clear view of the scene at the city gate. Gilderoy Lockhart sat astride a pure white hippogriff, cloaked in a gray robe. Dust lay in a thin film over his light blonde hair, and he looked tired but no less resolute or handsome. A sheathed longsword hung at his side, and a short staff rested across his back. The hippogriff drew a covered wagon from which children were being carried down one by anxious adults. A well-dressed wizard nearby threw his voice with a sonorous charm and announced across the city, "Citizens, we have news. The esteemed Ranger Wizard, a new legend of the wizarding world and the pride of Malfoy Manor, Mr. Gilderoy Lockhart, has just rescued the children abducted by the Basilisk and the Green Flame Party. All families who lost children in this incident, please come to the South Gate to claim your loved ones." The outer city, which had been somber and tense, exploded into life. Market stalls were abandoned as people surged toward the gate. Even those who hadn't lost children pressed forward for a glimpse of the new legend. "Oh my, he really did it," Harry said, awed. In his private daydreams, he imagined performing feats like that someday. "But is he really from Malfoy Manor?" Ron asked, puzzled. "His books never mention his life. That's why he's such a mystery." Hermione, still peering through the telescope, said, "Lord Voldemort's forces suffered a huge blow this time. With so many children rescued, he'll be furious, probably seething in the forests of Albania." Neville punched the air in excitement. He could feel for those children. At that moment, Lily came hurrying over with a bundle of bags, big and small. "Take these," she said, dumping them into James's arms. "These are custom high-grade cauldrons. Some families sold half, some gave away, so the little ones will have these 4 small ones." She chided them with a laugh. "Can you believe it? This year's Defense Against the Dark Arts professor is Gilderoy Lockhart. If I hadn't pressed a few family heads, I wouldn't have known until school started. Eat up, kids. Then we have to go greet our new professor." Hermione's eyes lit up. She hadn't realized Lily was a Lockhart fan too, nor that Dumbledore would invite this ranger wizard to teach Dada. She hurried to finish her ice cream, despite tears streaming from the sharp dogwood-flavored every flavor beans. "Lockhart is the new professor, and he's also going to be head of Slytherin," Harry blurted. "This white wizard, hailed as the next Dumbledore, ended up in Slytherin?" James said, with a little jealousy, as he stuffed Lily's bags into his bag of holding. When he was sorted, there was a hat stall. The sorting hat debated whether to put him in Slytherin or Ravenclaw. That's only happened a few times. Professor McGonagall, Lockhart, and, well, James trailed off. Harry mouthed the name to Hermione, Pettigrew. Even now, the sorting hat's choices seemed peculiar to them. There wasn't time for more speculation. Urged on by Lily, everyone finished their drinks and squeezed into the jostling crowd headed for the gate. Families were already reuniting on the roadside, clutching one another. Parents from the inner city, few though they were, had come out as well, quietly desperate to reclaim their children. How the Green Flame Party had bypassed the inner city's stricter wards, and how a basilisk had gotten inside the stone walls at all, remained a terrifying mystery. Another sonorous charm carried a new announcement over the din. By unanimous vote of the Malfoy Manor Council, we will award Mr. Gilderoy Lockhart the Malfoy Manor Platinum Knight Medal. The ceremony will be held next week. All citizens are invited to Flourish and Blotts Square to observe. Flourish and Blotts Square, the vast plaza stretching from the end of Diagon Alley to the inner city, dominated by a soaring platinum peacock under the sky dome, would likely be packed for the ceremony. The crowd surged again at the prospect. Muggles who served wizarding families smiled at the excitement and moved with them as they passed through the gate. Leaving the city required no complicated formalities. Outside the walls, Lockhart was surrounded by officials and reporters. Malfoy Manor even had its own paper called the Daily Prophet, though its expensive printing meant it circulated mainly among inner-city elites. Delivery was handled by Dobby and wizards skilled in apparition. A small knot of reporters jostled for position when Lily, wearing her most practiced smile, cut through with the others and made for Lockhart. The ranger wizard glanced up, and his face brightened when he saw who had arrived. As one of the few potion masters, Lily's portrait had clearly been noticed by him before. He excused himself from the others, rose to greet them with a practiced charm, and welcomed the Potters and their children into his inner circle. Lockhart was, in fact, 4 years younger than James and his friends. By the time he'd begun to make a name for himself at school, the Marauders, Lily, and Snape were already nearing graduation. Even if they were still attending classes, their attention had long since shifted to other things. James, Sirius, and the others were already doing what they could to help Dumbledore. Lily was buried in potion papers, working day and night to publish. Snape was constantly disguised, almost certainly already colluding with Lord Voldemort. As a result, most of the notable students from their year didn't really know Lockhart. He only became famous after graduation as a wandering ranger wizard, the kind-hearted avenger of wrongs and the prolific author of bestsellers. By the time any of them heard his name again, the only thing many remembered was his hat-related embarrassment at school. Standing beside Lockhart now was a wizard in the service of Malfoy Manor. Hermione hadn't noticed him through the telescope, but up close she saw how truly ugly he was, a squat, chubby figure that made his formal robes look like a bell and a poodle-like face. From the grown-ups' conversation, Hermione pieced together his name, Hector Parkinson, a scion of a pure-blood family and second in command of Malfoy Manor's administrative office. He's a pure-blood supremacist, hates Muggles and Muggle-borns, Harry whispered to Hermione. They say he has a daughter our age, but he refused Hogwarts' acceptance letter and teaches her at home. You don't need much imagination to know what he's raising her to be, Ron sneered. And for the record, while the Weasleys are on the so-called Sacred 28, we don't accept that. Neville was quick to add, the Longbottoms don't recognize that claim either. Ignoring the children's whispered debate, Parkinson saw the arrival of the Potters and Lockhart as a chance to draw attention. He slung an arm around Lockhart's shoulder, led Madame Lily to stand beside him, and loudly announced, "And one more piece of exciting news. Malfoy Manor's pride, Platinum Knight Mr. Lockhart, has been invited this year to take the post of Professor of the Reversal of Anti-Wizard Techniques at Hogwarts. He will also be serving as Slytherin's Dean." Another round of cheers rose up. Most of the people assembled had never been to that school. Some were Muggles who'd only heard wizards speak of it. None of that stopped them from cheering in the moment. "He won't even send his own daughter to Hogwarts, and yet he's so proud," Ron muttered. Lockhart put on his most ingratiating smile and kept up the small talk with Parkinson, but Lily didn't humor him. She cut him off bluntly. "Enough, Parkinson. We have school business to discuss." As a potions master, Lily could be more direct than Dumbledore. Malfoy Manor had another potions master, flashier, willing to take large orders for low-quality brews, obsessed with fame rather than coin. Parkinson bristled at Lily's dismissal. But there are still children who haven't been picked up by their parents." "Can't Malfoy Manor handle something that small?" Lily snapped. "Does Lockhart need to oversee it?" "Your mother's brilliant," Hermione whispered to Harry. At that moment, a thin, hurried scribe pushed forward. "Sir, families from the nearby town have collected their children. It's just—" he faltered. "There are still some orphans without parents. They might be from Muggle settlements farther out, or even squibs or Muggles." Because the quill of acceptance was overly sensitive, every year some of the children Lord Voldemort's men picked up included squibs and pure Muggle children, kids who'd only accidentally been exposed to magic. Unless a child had a public magical outburst, it was hard to tell the difference. Parkinson's face curled with disgust. Filthy mudbloods. Draft indentured servitude contracts, make them sign, and shove them into the orphanage. If Lockhart and the Potters hadn't been there, Parkinson would have preferred the children not enter the city at all. Even as slaves, they'd be a drain on resources. Feeding them until they could work would be a loss. Better, in his view, to recruit adult Muggles from the wild, like planting gnomes in the soil. If one died from overwork, another would be ready the next season. To Lockhart, James, and Lily, Parkinson's words sounded like the hiss of a devil. These children, barely 11, would be forced to sign contracts that bound them to servitude for life. Even if a few later manifested magic, most would face early death from constant labor and starvation. Wizarding contracts were brutally binding. They contained curses that punished breach harshly. Death was merciful compared to some of the old maledictions. Wizards had been known to curse violators into shrubs that bore bright red berries for animals to peck, or turn them into carpets or wheels to endure ceaseless torment. "Isn't there any other way to place them?" Lockhart asked. "Can't we find their families and send them back?" It was unlikely, the scribe admitted. The Green Flame Party typically attacked Muggle settlements by storm. They killed, pillaged, and took the children. The settlements were usually left empty and ruined. Parkinson clapped Lockhart on the shoulder. "You grew up at Malfoy Manor, Lockhart. This town doesn't support idlers. You know how much the poll tax is per person. Keeping the city running costs a pretty penny. Kindness doesn't pay the bills." Lockhart had no answer. He looked toward the caravan where several small, gaunt figures huddled together. The children's eyes were wide with terror. The strange robed wizards browsing them looked like shoppers inspecting livestock. Even the children's adult Muggle companions seemed numb, watching as if this were routine and not horror. Lily couldn't stand it. She exchanged a look with James. He nodded. Lockhart will take the remaining children. Godric's Hollow will take them in. We can afford to feed a few more mouths. Lockhart's surprise melted into gratitude, and he thanked her again and again. He'd always been a showman and a do-gooder, and his conscience wouldn't let him walk away. Parkinson snorted and muttered, "Bleeding heart," under his breath. He had no desire to deal with the trouble of mudbloods if someone else would be the sucker. "Lily, take the children to the leaky cauldron first," James said. "I'll go back to Cliff Street and contact people to make proper arrangements for these orphans." He kept glancing back every few steps, watching Lily and Lockhart chat as they led the children away, then awkwardly slipped through a nearby fireplace and vanished. 87. Conversation and Chaos. Beyond the outskirts near Malfoy Manor lay a flat sprawl of open country filled with a jumble of shacks of every size and shape. There had been no planning, no architecture, just a herd instinct that had pushed buildings together into a messy, sprawling settlement nearly half the size of the outer city. Nestled in that chaos was the Leaky Cauldron. It wasn't the old London building everyone thought of, only a nostalgic nod to the past, situated outside the city and run by a hunched, ugly old man named Old Tom. He was related to Hannah Abbott, really to the Abbott family, and though he was wealthy enough to live comfortably within Malfoy Manor, he disliked city life. Instead, he kept a tavern outside the city for those who couldn't afford the entry tax. Muggle or wizard, neighbor or drifter, people came to drink cheap diluted liquor or fizzy water with a hint of alcohol-flavored powder. Grains for brewing were scarce, after all, and to find some company. At that moment, Lockhart and Lily's group finally escaped Parkinson and his cronies and squeezed into the tavern, accompanied by a handful of orphans who had just disembarked from the caravan. Old Tom had already heard the news and stood at the door to welcome them. He shouted for the onlookers to clear a path, then personally wiped and cleaned a long table until it shone before inviting the children to sit. "Thank you, Old Tom. It would have taken us ages to do this ourselves," Lockhart said pleasantly. Old Tom only smiled and turned to shoo away well-wishers who had crowded around, making a quiet space for everyone to settle. Only then did Lily introduce the children beside her. "This is my son, Harry, and these are the classmates staying at my house this summer, Ron, Neville, and Hermione." Lockhart shook hands with each of them in his practiced, friendly manner. When it was Hermione's turn, he leaned in, curious. "I've read your name," he said. "Are you the author of that paper on Shining Stone magic and post-war spell research?" Hermione's face lit up. "You actually read it?" Lockhart lifted a hand, and a small blue light spun and bloomed steadily above his palm. "Not only did I read it, I think this branch of magic has a bright future. I just didn't expect its inventor to be a little girl not yet into her second year." Hermione noticed the stone energy in Lockhart's hand was stable and solid. He'd clearly practiced, and his level was higher than the men on the Cliff Street pioneering team. He probably wouldn't have trouble with basic Shining Stone magic at all. Harry bristled on Hermione's behalf. "What's wrong with a second year? Our Hermione, she's the one who defeated Lucius, and she helped save Hogwarts." Hermione slapped a hand over his mouth before he could finish. Lockhart looked amused and a little surprised at the small girl's fierceness. He couldn't have imagined how formidable she was in a fight, nor did he know why she was called the Basilisk Slayer. "It's a bit exaggerated," Hermione said with a shy smile. "Actually, Professor, I'm a big fan of yours, a hero who champions justice and rescues children. That's admirable." Her gaze drifted to the orphans. They were in rags and were wolfing down the muffins and water Old Tom had brought them. When they realized Hermione was looking, they lowered their heads. "It's a good thing you rescued the children," Lily said. "If you hadn't, enrollment this year would have looked grim." Lockhart sobered. "There's nothing to boast about. I happened to be passing and noticed traces of the basilisk. I found the valley where they were being kept and ambushed the guards while the Death Eaters were using the beast to hunt for food. That's how I brought the children out." "If I had to face that basilisk directly," he added, and then paused. I don't think I'd stand much of a chance either. Hermione frowned. Is it the same basilisk Lord Voldemort took from the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets? Even if it had been fed and grown for years, a basilisk shouldn't be that difficult. Its weaknesses are well documented. She had read extensively about basilisks. Their vulnerabilities were clear. As an experienced ranger wizard, dealing with one ought not to be beyond her. Lockhart hadn't known about the Chamber of Secrets, so Harry and the others filled him in. When Lockhart heard the story, his eyes darkened. So that's where it came from, he muttered. It's been rampaging for years. Who knows where Voldemort found it before? He shook his head. But that one is different. God knows how many bodies Voldemort fed it over the years. He was constantly modifying it with dark arts. The common weaknesses won't work on it anymore. Hermione's frown deepened. From the damage to the stone walls of Malfoy Manor, she estimated the basilisk's body width at over 10 meters. Hogwarts' widest sewer pipes were maybe 4 or 5 meters across. The creature had clearly grown to an enormous size over time. Lily's face, too, went serious. With so many children gone this time, the Green Flame party will surely escalate. We'll be very busy next week. Hermione remembered school was about to start, and with it the yearly battle between professors and Death Eaters for students. She recalled Harry saying his parents used to come home injured in previous years and couldn't help feeling worried. I will not let Lord Voldemort succeed again, Lockhart said, his voice low and fierce. That basilisk, I'll destroy it. With Professor Lockhart here this year, the Death Eaters are going to have a headache, Hermione echoed. It wasn't that she overestimated his raw power. Honestly, she thought with a full supply of Philosopher's Stone, she could probably hold her own against him. But the man had traveled widely and written many books, and his cultured, narrative way of explaining things impressed her. He could turn knowledge into stories that were simple, entertaining, and memorable, far more effective than dry theses. For novice wizards, his insights and survival experience were exactly what they needed. I didn't think Dumbledore could convince you to come, Lily said. Last I heard you were in Northern Europe. Lockhart sighed and smiled wryly. Even I didn't expect to agree to his request. To tell the truth, I didn't want to be Slytherin Dean or to represent the nobles at Malfoy Manor. Dumbledore insisted I was the best candidate. Lily scoffed. Those nobles were still arguing today. They nominated several so-called wizards for the Defense Against the Dark Arts position, but they couldn't even solve the traps Dumbledore set. They were talking about Barty Crouch's son, Lockhart continued. He left Hogwarts an outstanding student, 12 O's, but the families voted him down. They couldn't bear the thought of a Crouch as the new Malfoy. The world is already broken, and they're still vying for power, Lily muttered. Lockhart shrugged. I had actually planned to head to the Arctic this year. A team of wizards and muggles wanted to find refuge there, and I was going to escort them across the sea. The Arctic? Lily blinked. What refuge is there? Dumbledore sent Lupin and others there a while back. Was it for that? It's Greenland, Lockhart explained. A rumor spread that somewhere in Greenland there's a fertile haven, open water and green pastures, unspoiled by the winter curse or nuclear fallout. People call it the ideal land. It said powerful wizards built a home there and treat muggles and wizards equally, letting anyone start anew. It sounds like a cult, Lily said with a frown. Hasn't it been exposed? He shook his head. There are powerful wizards who treat muggles and wizards equally. Doesn't that sound like Dumbledore? Why would they risk dying at sea? Dumbledore's ideals haven't changed the continent. His promises of a better future haven't been realized. They refuse to believe what's right in front of them and chase legends instead, Hermione said, pouting. Then she looked at Lockhart. Do you believe in Dumbledore? In that ideal land in Greenland? Lockhart grinned. Haven't I already become a professor at Hogwarts? They all laughed. Then, without warning, loud shouts and commotion erupted outside the tavern. The table trembled. Lockhart frowned. Stay here. I'll go check, he said, standing up and going out. Dozens of curious onlookers followed him into the street. 88. Basilisk attack. A gloomy green light blossomed in the distance, followed by shouts and screams. The ground trembled as a mountain-sized basilisk lifted its head from where it had smashed into the earth moments before. Its mouth hung in bloody tatters. Its dim green snake eyes, cold and malicious, swept over the panicked crowd. Anyone who accidentally met that gaze, wizard or muggle, dropped dead where they stood. Several Death Eaters in black robes stood beside the basilisk, advancing steadily from the edge of the shantytown. They laughed sinisterly and sent killing curses into the throng at random. "It's the Green Flame Party," Lockhart shouted, turning toward the inn's interior. "Tell the children not to look that way." He didn't wait for an answer. He bolted out of the bar. With a whistle, the hippogriff that had been harnessed to the caravan shook off its bridle and galloped over. Lockhart swung up onto its back, and man and beast took to the air, angling for the basilisk. Lily hurried to the doorway and watched the chaos unfold. Are the Green Flame Party declaring war on Malfoy Manor? Do they really think they can slaughter their way here just because someone rescued a child? She hissed. She glanced toward the city gate and found the Aurors guarding Malfoy Manor had not charged out. Instead, they summoned a curtain of black smoke along the newly repaired stone wall and dug in, seemingly intent on holding their defenses. "Damn it, they're just going to let the Green Flame Party kill people outside the city?" Lily spat. Old Tom was calm. He waved his hand and slammed down the inn's shutters one by one. "Those outside the city aren't citizens," he said quietly. "Malfoy Manor doesn't care about them. To them, if the Green Flame Party kills a few muggles to vent, that's useful. Wizards, get your wands. Bring the children to the center. There are firearms in the cellar. Muggles, arm yourselves. We're on our own." The pub wasn't full. The rest had gone out with Lockhart earlier. A few had paid to be admitted into Malfoy Manor. Others had fled through fireplaces in the chaos. The flu powder had been knocked over, cutting off any later arrivals. Besides Lily and the children, fewer than 10 adults remained in the inn, most of them Muggles. High above, Lockhart rode fast on the hippogriff, sword in one hand, wand in the other. An exploding curse sent 2 Death Eaters tumbling. Transfiguration turned the ground under them to stone and buried them. Before he could follow up, the basilisk's head whipped around and roared. Lockhart narrowly avoided its maw. The serpent smashed another huge crater into the earth. "Ha! Lockhart, the Ranger Wizard of Light and Hope!" A voice called from the basilisk's flank, distorted by magic, so the speaker's identity was hidden. Lockhart turned, heart pounding. Floating beside the rising head was a black-robed Death Eater, hooded, his face hidden. Only a pair of pale green eyes glittered mockingly. "While you were out with the basilisk, you ambushed the guards and stole the child. Clever," the man sneered. "But the Master of Death is not deceived. Newborns are the tithe he demands from this land. If you refuse to pay, then let the messenger of death bring death to you." The Death Eaters screamed and surged into the crowd. Emerald-killing curses blossomed among the people. Groups dropped where they stood, breath seizing from their bodies. Most of those outside the city were Muggles and down-and-out wizards. No proper schooling, barely functional magic at best, and many starving. They had no chance. "Damn it!" Lockhart ground out. The hippogriff, feeling his urgency, beat its wings and tried to swing around the basilisk to reach the other Death Eaters. But the 2 powerful adversaries wouldn't let him through. The basilisk's bloody maw and the leader's dark arts spells forced the beast into a desperate, evasive arc. Lockhart deflected the leader's evil curse while dodging the snake's head. "Old Tom, watch the children!" Lily drank a potion and said, then added, "Lockhart can't face this alone. We have to hold until James and the people from Cliff Street arrive." She uncorked another vial and with a flick of her wand, poured a white mist from it. The vapor flowed out the door and swelled into a thick curtain that cloaked the entire pub. The potion was toxic, but it would also confuse the basilisk's vision, good enough to protect the children. Striding into the mist, Lily ran toward the battle. She used transfiguration to fuse nearby shanties into a crude barricade and shouted to the fleeing crowd, "This way! Move through here!" The people surged toward her like toward a lifeline. Behind the wall of black smoke at the city gate, fully armed Aurors watched nervously. They showed no sign of attacking. "You cowards! Are you really going to let the Green Flame Party march over everyone?" Lily demanded. "Jason, don't hide behind others. I see you," she called. One of the Aurors was a former student, brilliant and now enviably posted at Malfoy Manor. Her words as a professor hit him like daggers. He bowed his head in shame, but the Auror captain, noble, austere, stared impassively at the carnage and said coldly, "Our duty is to guard Malfoy Manor. Those outside the city are not our concern." A fat figure squeezed through the ranks, Parkinson. "Of course, Professor Lily, will protect you and your children," he sniffed, "but not those mudbloods." He meant the Muggle orphans Lockhart had rescued, and perhaps Hermione as well. Lily's disappointment was quiet now. Many people had already gone through the barricade and found shelter behind her, but the Death Eaters pressed hard. She couldn't pour toxic potions indiscriminately with so many civilians around. She had to stop the attackers with Stupefy and other direct spells, one by one. The Death Eaters weren't individually powerful, but they fired in concentrated volleys. The exhausted wild wizards who'd fled tried to fight back in their own clumsy ways, but the gap in skill was too wide. Lockhart, on his hippogriff, made a wide sweep and transfigured roofstones into huge roosters that flapped and crowed wildly. The basilisk only shook its massive head and grew angrier, roaring as it charged through, crushing shacks beneath its bulk. Lockhart sent 2 eye-blinding curses at awkward angles, but the basilisk's lids deflected them. Its lethal stare remained the greatest threat. He couldn't let it keep killing at will. He tried another transfiguration, hurling a hard stone blindfold that snapped onto the basilisk's face, but the Death Eater leader blasted it to pieces with a powerful spell the next moment. The leader's strength was obvious. He was no ordinary follower. With that kind of assistance, Lockhart could only scramble to survive, parrying continuous assaults. He couldn't risk looking at the basilisk's eyes and had to read its intentions from the movement of its neck. Fortunately, the hippogriff was clever enough to avoid the serpent's gaze. Otherwise, it would have died long before Lockhart. But relying on the hippogriff's evasive maneuvers wasn't a long-term plan. Its stamina would fail, and then neither it nor Lockhart would withstand the basilisk's relentless assault. The tavern was pitch black, lit only by a few slivers of light seeping through the cracks. Lily's potion mist clouded the windows, blocking the basilisk's sight, and everyone inside's view of the chaos outside. Old Tom and 2 rough-looking wizards pressed themselves around the children in the center, while the Muggles busied themselves pressurizing the steam tanks on their air rifles. No one spoke. The vibrations and screams from the street made every heart tremble. "Are we just going to sit here?" Harry whispered, restless. "What if Professor Lockhart and Mom? We can't break through Lily's potion, can we?" Neville said, clutching the wand his parents had given him the last time they'd seen him. It wasn't much, but it was something. "This stuff's dangerous. Don't touch it." A man moved toward the mist despite the warning, and Hermione snapped at him to stop. Then a dark shadow burst into the potion cloud and, before anyone could see it clearly, it screamed and dissolved into a puddle of viscous liquid. The warning was harsh and immediate. Everyone shrank away from the mist, huddling toward the center. Lily's protective concoction was not merciful. Hermione wasn't the sort to stay idle. She searched the dim room and asked Old Tom, "Where's the staircase to the attic?" He pointed, bewildered. Hermione grabbed her staff and ran. The mist could block sight, but it could not block Sky-Eye. The basilisk was making far too much noise. Hermione only had to tune her senses to activate her ability and find it. Old Tom followed behind her, out of breath. She kicked through a pane of glass, used a levitation charm to flip the window open, and vaulted onto the roof. Beyond the black tiles, a white sea of mist rolled and boiled. She scrambled up to the highest point of the chimney, shut her eyes, and concentrated. Around her, the battle roared. Spells whistled, explosions cracked, screams split the air. Red, blue, and green lights flickered across the mist like a ruined canvas. She searched for the strongest vibration. A mountain-like black shadow hissed. When she opened her eyes, they shone a fluorescent blue. Sky-Eye had locked on. The basilisk's position, every movement, every detail, glowed clear in her vision. Her staff began to hum and glow. The philosopher's stone energy lying in the golden snitch she carried unfurled, flowing into the staff. She raised it, and a giant energy longbow formed before her, the arrow itself woven from philosopher's stone light. Old Tom, peering out a shattered attic window, gaped in astonishment. Loretta's great bow, the Royal Knight's magic that forges a weapon from pure power, had manifested. Charging would magnify its force. Hermione pushed the charge once. The bow's glow expanded. She charged again. It flared like a nova. From her sky-eye perspective, she could not see Professor Lockhart, but by the way the basilisk turned its head, she could approximate where he was. To avoid hitting him, Hermione aimed for the beast's swollen lower abdomen. The light tightened into a razor-sharp focus, the gusting air cutting through the mist. Then she released. The azure Philosopher's Stone arrow vanished through the sky in an instant. Outside, Lily was still locking wands with Death Eaters, pulling people to cover. When she felt a change in the magic around her, she looked up and saw a brilliant blue streak slicing through the mist. Lightning flashed across the clouds, stones split with a thunderous boom, and a faint blue scorch marked the air. The basilisk screamed. Far off, a gash the size of a house ripped open along the great snake's belly. Charred flesh hung loose, and the enormous head could no longer support itself. It slammed heavily to the ground. Everyone stared, stunned. What kind of magic could pierce the basilisk's famously magic-resistant scales and tear such a wound? Who had fired it, and why hide in the mist? If that wizard had joined the fight sooner, would the tide have turned hours ago? Lockhart and the Death Eaters who had been attacking him paused to look. Lily, however, allowed herself a small, relieved breath. She knew at once which magic could do that. Philosopher's Stone power, the shining stone magic only one person among them could wield like that. But the basilisk was not done. It strained up, rotten flesh swinging from the wound, and a pulsing green light bloomed within it, shoring up its vitality. It let out a terrible, piercing cry that snapped everyone back to the fight. This creature had been altered by Voldemort. It did not die easily. One huge blow would only enrage it more. "Go! Kill the wizard in the mist!" the Death Eater leader barked, then turned into a cloud of black smoke and shot toward Lockhart, intent on taking the troublemaker out himself. The command fit the creature's rage. The basilisk twisted and lunged toward the tavern at terrifying speed. Lily's face tightened. She uncorked bottle after bottle, waving her wand to atomize their contents. Those vapors mixed with the white potion mist already surrounding the tavern, reacting into a thick, deadly, pale purple cloud. Most of the people who needed to escape had already done so by then, which kept collateral damage down. Lily summoned a gust of wind and drove the poison-laden cloud straight at the basilisk. The sharper-eyed Death Eaters who saw the cloud fled on the wind. The others, slower or less wise, were caught and vanished into the mist in silence. On the rooftop, the blue light flared again. Without the mist to hide her, Hermione's small figure came plainly into view, and for a moment everyone's brain registered disbelief. It was only a little girl. The great bow opened and swelled as she began charging another shot. The basilisk fixed its deadly gaze on her. Hermione shut her eyes and trusted Sky-Eye alone to aim. A poisonous wind from Lily's concoction whipped across the street. The basilisk's scales sizzled, sending off plumes of steam as they dissolved. It did not slow. It was coming to vent its fury on the source of the hurt. A green glow gathered in the basilisk's maw, alive with venom, fetid with the corpses it had swallowed, and it hurled that dreadful, death-pregnant mass straight toward the tavern. Hermione released the light arrow in her hand at the same moment. The same blue beam cut across the sky and slammed into the basilisk's spray. The explosion thundered again. The heat boiled away the venom and the flesh, leaving only two pure energies colliding and rippling against each other. They held. Everyone felt a surge of hope. Lily's potion wind was still working, and if the basilisk didn't pull back, it might truly be undone. Before they could celebrate, a cold voice cried, "Bombarda!" The Death Eater leader, who had been tangled with Lockhart, dissolved into smoke and reformed above the tavern, launching a devastating blast. No! Lily's eyes went red, but before she could react, the whole tavern was shredded with a roar. A great cloud of dust filled the air. Lily swept aside the debris and rushed in. The scene she feared did not appear. A crumbling shield had protected everyone. Old Tom, shaken, still held his wand. He had not expected his shield charm to take the brunt of such an explosion. Harry and the children, and the others, crouched under his barrier, bruised and dirty, but alive. Old Tom was no powerful wizard. only a kindly, modest man with a little magic and some means. Yet he had stopped an attack that had come from the same hand that could have faced Lockhart down. In a corner, Hermione had not noticed. The golden snitch, its glow much dimmed, floated back under her robe. She drifted gently to the ground, aided by a levitation charm like a falling leaf. A caster is most vulnerable while charging a spell. She hadn't neglected her own safety. The snitch had been quietly guarding her, and when the blast fell, it darted out, using the extraordinary energy within it to counter most of the attack. Some residual force smashed the tavern, but what remained was taken by Old Tom's shield. Hermione landed and apologized to Lily. "I'm sorry. Because of me, Harry and the others were put in danger." Lily shook her head. "If you hadn't helped, we all would have been in danger." All around them, furious, determined eyes turned to the Death Eater leader above. Lily blurred into a white mist and shot up, the pale purple potion wind trailing behind her like an enraged serpent of smoke, coiling toward the dark figure. The hippogriff gave a fierce cry and flew up as well. Lockhart, furious at letting his opponent slip, turned to finish the heavily wounded basilisk. The creature erupted in dull explosions and flame along its flank, scales torn away as it hissed and writhed. The other Death Eaters had drawn back and kept their distance. The leader apparated again, twisting free of the potion wind's grip. The wide, sweeping pressure forced him farther from the tavern, pushed out across the distant sky. Unseen by him, the heavens seemed to redden. The air grew hot. He felt a bad premonition. The basilisk, whose senses were keener, began to calm after its clash with Lockhart and sensed the same danger. It slunk down beneath the leader. The remaining Death Eaters gathered quickly. Above them, the sky warped into a strange, fiery bank of clouds, like the blood-red dusk described in books. The air itself shimmered with heat. "Dumbledore!" someone cried. By the hearth, the old man had appeared silently and was already casting, his eyes fixed on the sky. The sight of the white wizard, hope and power in one figure, steadied everyone. The Death Eaters' panic replaced their earlier confidence, but Dumbledore's spell had already woven itself. Swirling fire clouds gathered and thickened overhead. Some of the Death Eaters flung spells up at it, but the clouds were unaffected. Others tried to apparate away and found the space suddenly solid as iron. Anti-apparition barriers had folded, and their magic failed utterly. The basilisk roared at the sky. In the center of the fire cloud, a pale, condensed ball of light swelled like a pressure point ready to burst. "Is this the strongest white wizard?" Hermione said, staring up in envy. That sort of power, like a natural calamity, set her thoughts racing. If she wished, on the day of the soul contraction ritual, she could seize Dumbledore's ashes and make them her own. She pushed the thought away. She knew she wouldn't. On the edge of the clouding sky, the Death Eater leader shouted, voice iron hard. "We have lost so many children. If we go back, it's a death sentence. Better to be loyal to Father here." As soon as he finished, the Death Eaters around him erupted into green fire, insolent, destructive magic that blossomed outward and engulfed the basilisk and the leader. The protective space, once like an iron wall, finally broke under the immolation. In the dark green vortex, leader and basilisk vanished in an instant. There was nothing left. "Damn it! They got away!" Despair and rage ran through the crowd. Dumbledore waved his wand, and the fire clouds drew apart and faded. The sky settled back into the heavy, leaden gray it had been before. Survivors crawled from whatever shelter they had taken and stared at the scarred land in a silence full of lingering fear. This, the destructive capacity that wizards could muster, was a small thing compared to the war, but it was terrifying enough. Lily and Lockhart flew over with the children to stand by Dumbledore. "Professor Potter, I'm so sorry," Lockhart said earnestly to Lily. "I lost sight of him. My negligence put the children in danger." Lily said nothing, though her heart had been in her throat. It had turned out all right in the end. James pushed through the crowd from Cliff Street, dragging in the people who had rushed over in alarm. "Good heavens, what happened here? I was only gone for a minute," Dumbledore replied softly. "Perhaps by Merlin's blessing I happened to be nearby buying some new sweets, and I saw the commotion. If I had been any later, I would have been worrying over who would teach potions and defense against the dark arts." It was, of course, a little joke. How could the old headmaster, of all people, be truly distracted by candy. Only a few would notice the wink. When Lily saw James, she flared. Hands on her hips, she planted herself in front of him. You disappeared at the crucial moment. Do you know if Dumbledore had been a little later, the children and I might all have died? James looked stunned at first, then, when the whole story sank in, wrapped his arms around Lily and Harry and murmured something into their ears. The crowd clustered around Dumbledore, buzzing. Hermione found the other children. Ron stood staring numbly at his wand, snapped clean in two. It had been a Weasley family heirloom, used by Arthur, Bill, Charlie, Percy, a fine wand from before the war. It had finally retired during the tavern's collapse. "It's broken," Ron whispered. "We can get you a new one." "That's not a problem," Hermione said. "It broke in a humiliating way," Ron answered, the look on his face suddenly fierce and adult. "Not in a proper fight with a dark wizard, but hiding under someone else's protection, and then snapped by a stupid falling beam." His voice was hoarse. Hermione understood. It wasn't the wand as much as how it made him feel, useless in the fight. "My dad and my brothers all got new wands at some point. They were right." He lifted his chin. "When school starts, I'm going to get a new wand too." "Me too. We can go together," Neville called, laughing. He had never liked the hand-me-down wand he had been given. At the edge of the crowd, Parkinson pushed forward with an auror, flattering Dumbledore with oily words. The people around them looked at them with open scorn. These Malfoy-aligned nobles had huddled away from danger to save themselves. Their smooth apologies rang false. "Dumbledore, thank you for your timely rescue. Malfoy Manor will never forget it. It's all a mess here. Perhaps we should go into town? I'll have Honeydukes send over their latest confections." Dumbledore treated him as if he hadn't spoken and turned instead to James and Lily with a smile. "It's getting late. Why don't we go back to Cliff Street together? The air here isn't very pleasant." Parkinson's face went an ugly shade, and the crowd laughed. No one mourned aloud for the Muggles and wild wizards who had died in the chaos. The grief was a quiet thing, held in eyes and hands rather than shouted in the square. Chapter 91, Rebirth, Recapture. The professors didn't stay long on Cliff Street. After bringing the children back, they apparated to Hogwarts to discuss the upcoming freshman defense battle. Hermione used the excuse of returning to school to check on the Philosopher's Stone and followed them. Harry and the others, meanwhile, remained on Cliff Street to help settle the newly arrived orphans. The fate of those children had reached a crossroads. Those whose names appeared in the Book of Admittance would be taken to Hogwarts. Squibs could only stay on Cliff Street and attend Muggle lessons with Dudley and the others. It was a cruel twist. Companions who had faced life and death together would now go their separate ways because of an inborn difference. Thinking of that, Hermione understood a little better why Aunt Petunia had always been so anxious. Hogwarts looked the same as always, but with almost no one around for the past 2 months, the castle felt oddly deserted. The students assigned to Professor Sprout were few and scattered. Many parts of the school were empty. Hermione first went to the Philosopher's Stone Hall. Hagrid wasn't outside his room. He was probably off on one of Dumbledore's errands, but 2 large acromantulas guarded the entrance. They recognized Hermione and the heavy Callia greatsword she carried. They crawled over obediently to let her pat their heads, though all 8 of their legs trembled. After the summer, the hall had been restored to its old appearance. Wizard chess statues stood on either side of the room. Magical plants rested quietly in the beds, and secret doors in the walls let spiders appear suddenly. Hermione suspected Lily's snail ritual was hidden behind one of those doors. Once she was satisfied the stone was stable, she hurried to the 8th floor and arrived just in time to see the professors about to enter the headmaster's office for a meeting. They hadn't planned on bringing a student, but Hermione's pleading look was hard to refuse. McGonagall, stone-faced as ever, slipped an arm through hers and lifted her inside. The headmaster's office had been completely transformed. The dim, haunted atmosphere was gone. The room was bright and open. The old magic circles, ritual candles, and even the mirror of Erised had been removed. It felt like a proper, magnificent office now. Dumbledore stood at the round table, surrounded by professors and members of the Order of the Phoenix. Sprout, Flitwick, Lily, Lockhart, McGonagall, and veterans like James, Sirius, and Lupin, among others. Hermione didn't recognize. Not every Hogwarts professor was a seasoned fighter. Quirrell could teach theory, but paled at the sight of Death Eaters. And Firenze, the centaur, had little spellcasting ability, so combat members of the Order took part in the freshman defense each year. Hermione spotted Mundungus slumped by the window. After 2 months of recovery, he seemed less ill, though his face remained drawn and his lips had a bluish tint. He leaned weakly against the sill, eyes still flicking to the golden instruments in the office, as if searching for something to steal, an image at odds with any heroic undercover agent ideal. Voices and small talk filled the room. "Hey, why's a student here?" a deep, hoarse voice asked from beside Hermione. A tall, shadowed figure loomed over her. McGonagall replied crisply, "Moody, this is Hermione. I brought her in." Hermione looked up and took in the man fully, messy gray hair, a face sliced with scars, and the bright blue artificial eye that glowed from his socket. It blinked as it fixed on her. A cold sense of being measured passed over her, but her own sky eye reacted instinctively, a resistance she couldn't explain that seemed to stop his gaze. "My magical eye can't see through her," Moody muttered, a nasty smile showing beneath his beard. "Is this the little girl who bested Lucius? How interesting." He limped over to Mundungus and swatted his hand away from a silver ornament he'd been eyeing. Hermione noticed Moody's wooden leg and wondered why he hadn't replaced it with a living silver prosthetic, like Professor Flitwick's. "Not just that," Lockhart said, nodding toward Hermione. "She was a great help with the basilisk. Ordinary magic can't pierce basilisk scales. I might need some tips on Shining Stone magic from you." "An honor to fight alongside the famous Ranger Wizard this year," Moody grunted, nodding politely to Lockhart. Lockhart bowed and muttered about feeling honored to work with a veteran of the World War. Moody was old. His scars looked like wartime marks. He'd been among the first to follow Dumbledore, perhaps even a contemporary of Lord Voldemort. While the professors chatted, McGonagall came up carrying a huge book bound in black dragon hide, the Book of Admittance. Inside its pages, names were written on dense sheets of parchment. After Voldemort stole the original quill of acceptance, Dumbledore had conjured a replacement, but it wasn't as sensitive. It sometimes missed gifted children. The book lay open on the table for all to see. Dumbledore took his place at the head of the table. "It is that time of year again," he said quietly. "Our struggle with Lord Voldemort will begin anew. Because of my mistake, I have had to ask my colleagues to face these dangers every year," he continued, inclining his head. "But this time, I can fight alongside you." He looked at Hermione and gave a brief, approving nod. "And we are fortunate to have Professor Lockhart with us this year. We also recently severely wounded Voldemort's basilisk, which lessens the danger this season." Lockhart lowered his head humbly. Around the room, a number of the wizards were his equals, and several were far stronger. "As in previous years, each team will be 2 people, Dumbledore went on. "According to the assigned lists and routes, each pair will go to their designated area to search for children." He pointed to a small round mirror on the table. A 2-way mirror, part of the compensation from Malfoy Manor, mass-produced by Beauxbatons. Each group will take 1. The back lists contact mirrors for the other groups. Tap the frame and you can switch contacts. He reached out and stroked Fawkes, who perched nearby. "This year, I will personally go to Albania. Voldemort will not be allowed to leave that forest. Hogwarts freshmen must not be taken by him again." Dumbledore, at his old best, had a different command of things now. Perhaps the Philosopher's Stone and a stabilized castle had given them a secure rear base, and with their strongest champion returned, McGonagall felt renewed. They expected a record number of freshmen this year. The only person who felt unwilling was Hermione. During the team assignments, she was quietly passed over. She had tried every way to be included, but the professors were determined not to send a second-year student into battle, even if she was more than capable of helping. She stood there, altar of protest unopened, while the others organized themselves for the coming struggle. 92. Left behind children. Hermione was finally dragged back to Cliff Street by Lily, accompanied by Sirius and Lupin. They would be staying at the Potters that night, enjoying a hearty pre-battle meal before gathering at Hogwarts in the morning and setting off to their assigned posts. Unable to join the fight herself, Hermione vented her frustration on the food. James had specially roasted 2 large roosters he'd acquired from Malfoy Manor. Raised in a magically maintained ecosphere since hatchling, the birds were huge and well-fed. No wonder their price had been steep. Keeping those all-natural beasts required wizards to tend the ecological magics day and night. 2 roosters still weren't much for so many mouths. The 4 drumsticks went to the 4 children. The adults took the rest. At the table, the grown-ups laughed and talked, while Hermione ate in silence. The other 3 children were subdued, distracted by the weight of what the next day would bring. Their parents were members of the Order of the Phoenix. Mrs. Weasley would not fight, but Mr. Weasley and Bill were listed, and the Potters and Longbottoms were all going into battle. The children had been raised with this danger, but that didn't make it any less frightening. Every year at this time, parents came back wounded, and sometimes a visiting uncle or aunt didn't come back at all. The cruelty of it was something even the children could feel. They didn't mention it, they simply tried to be extra obedient so there would be fewer worries for their parents. The night passed quickly. Early the next morning, the house rose together. James and the others were nearly ready when they saw the 4 children standing at the doorway, watching. "If you were this obedient every day, I'd go out and take on 2 more Death Eaters," Lily said with exasperated affection. Waking the boys during holidays was always an ordeal. The 4 children reluctantly followed the adults to the fireplace. Lily's instructions were still coming in a stream. "While you're at your aunt's, no using magic to bully your cousin, no pranks, eat whatever your aunt cooks, and don't be picky about it. And in the workshop at home, only the first open cabinet is for you. Your assignments and potion ingredients are in there. I'll check when I get back. Don't touch the other cabinets. Hermione can't even break the curses on them. Don't think about asking her for help either. And the assignments, don't try to cheat. I know your levels." After a final round of nagging, the 4 adults apparated away. The children looked at one another. "Do we go do homework now?" someone asked. "Or go to Aunt's to be nagged?" "I'd rather do homework," Ron said, and they all headed back to the potion workshop with Hermione. Lily's homework list was meant to reinforce their special training over the summer, something every professor prepared to keep students busy at this time of year. Ron and Neville were to brew a qualified anti-radiation potion and a dittany essence. Extra credit would be awarded for a successful cheering charm. Harry's tasks were stiffer. He was expected to brew the cheering charm and Wiggenweld potion by himself, with Skelegro as an optional challenge. Lily had wanted him to try Polyjuice as well, but Harry had struggled just to memorize the steps, so she chose a more reasonable workload. Hermione, having already perfected Polyjuice by the end of the holidays, was not given new assignments. Instead, Lily left her in charge of supervising the 3 boys to make sure they didn't cheat. Hermione, however, had her own plan. She'd come to the same conclusion as Professor McGonagall, words of consolation aside. Huahuat Xiang, the flower fire scent, wasn't particularly useful to powerful wizards in the way more universally applied charms were. It wasn't the kind of thing she could hand to Lily and reliably help on a battlefield. So with a few idle days ahead, Hermione decided to attempt reproducing other scents from the Forbidden Land. Formulas she thought would be far more practical. She was most hopeful about 2, invigorating perfume and the iron pot potion. The invigorating perfume not only boosted the user's strength, but also formed a temporary shield that could absorb a single damaging strike, practically a simultaneous enhancement to magical power and a shield charm. The iron pot potion would transform the body into a movable iron-like form, vastly increasing resistance to blows and imparting a grim, steely will. Hermione didn't expect either to make someone invulnerable to a killing curse, but she believed they could blunt the effects of Crucio and Imperio, render ordinary Stupefy or Expelliarmus ineffective, and make someone highly resistant to transfiguration. That combination would be extremely useful. The problem was twofold. The formulas themselves were difficult to modulate, and the core ingredients were virtually unobtainable in their world. The invigorating perfume required the empty shell of a silver tear, an alchemical byproduct unique to the underground of the Eternal City. The silver tear was a liquid metal that existed between life and death. It was considered a kind of artificial life, even said to possess a soul. The full moon queen, who wielded the great rune of birth, allegedly had to consume the tear's core when helping the tarnished be reborn. The iron pot potion demanded fragments of living jars, shards of the mysterious ceramic jar lives made during the Golden Dynasty. Those living vessels had been created to house bodies whose souls returned to the Erd Tree. A fragrance forged from their fragments could alter organic life toward living inorganic matter. Jarburg's tragic massacre had reportedly been driven by the value of those living jars. There were no such artificial lives in Hermione's world. If she could find suitable substitutes, even if weaker, it might be enough. The cabinet Lily had opened supplied only basic materials, but Hermione set about testing each one's properties. The work required meticulous trial and error and allowed no sloppiness. Fortunately, there was nothing else to do. She could both supervise the boys and run experiments, measuring and recording, repeating mixtures until something promising emerged. Chapter 93. Information Leakage. The Green Flame Party's brazen attack outside Malfoy Manor became the talk of the wizarding world overnight. Professor Lockhart and Lily's valiant protection of the vulnerable, Dumbledore's last-minute arrival like a living legend, and Hermione, who had shone brilliantly through it all, were discussed with eager fascination. Many people only realized later that the little girl who had used an unusual spell to injure the basilisk was the inventor of Shining Stone magic. That revelation gave the spell a fresh boost in reputation. Those who had dismissed it before, seeing that it could wound a basilisk, rushed to buy copies of post-war spell research. They thought, if a little girl can wield it so effectively, surely I can too. In the aftermath, Malfoy Manor and several other major wizarding institutions issued a joint declaration promising to crack down on the Green Flame Party. The scene, however, made it clear these nobles cared only about their own safety. They treated Muggles and lower-class wizards as if they were invisible. Their statement was partly for show, to posture as righteous, and partly because the conflict between Hogwarts and the Green Flame Party had just begun. A little bluster and a token dispatch of unimportant personnel allowed them to claim, with moral authority, that they had dealt a heavy blow to the attackers. They could even take partial credit for what the professors and the Order of the Phoenix had actually achieved. Hogwarts' evacuation effort resumed with the new student defense battle underway, and the professors prioritized rescuing children from the furthest reaches first: Northern Europe, Egypt, the Far East, then those closer by, leaving the nearest behind. Some, like Hermione, weren't collected until the first day of term. In the days that followed, skirmishes between the Order and Death Eaters were constant, but with the basilisk injured and Professor Lockhart present, the results were favorable. Voldemort's most dangerous lieutenants, men like Snape and women like Bellatrix, either did not appear or were cut off and hunted by the professors. Bellatrix nearly died at Moody's hands, but escaped with the kind of skill that made it clear she belonged at the top of Voldemort's roster, slipping away twice in succession. None of this had anything to do with Hermione, which left her frustrated. For days, she had tried every material she could find, with nothing but failure. She even slipped back into Malfoy Manor through the fireplace to buy rarer components with the royalties from her book, but she still could not replace the empty silver tear shell or the living pot fragments. It pained her, but she refused to give up. She had planned another trip to restock at Malfoy Manor before the professors returned. That plan collapsed when a new rumor forced her to stay on Cliff Street. Someone, no one knew which bored wizard, had wandered into Godric's Hollow and noticed that the radiation there was far lower than it should be. Worse for the secretive inhabitants of Cliff Street, this same wanderer reported seeing members of the Cliff Street exploration team strolling through the valley, chatting and laughing beneath a starlight that smelled faintly of Philosopher's Stone. He took the news straight to Malfoy Manor, and soon the Daily Prophet was running breathless stories. Godric's Hollow had somehow mastered radiation clearance. For decades, Nuclear devastation had left too many scorched scars. Once habitable, resource-rich, well-connected population centers turned into lethal, irradiated wastelands. Their geography still mattered, and both wizards and muggles yearned for a way to cleanse and rebuild them. If Godric's Hollow had cracked that problem, it was revolutionary. Wizards from every quarter flocked there. Those without an invitation could not access Cliff Street by flue and found no other entrance, so they wandered the less dangerous valley ruins instead. Anyone from Cliff Street, explorers or procurement agents, was immediately besieged the moment they were recognized, pulled aside, and peppered with questions. Some delegates forced their way in through fireplaces, burdened with commissions and queries. Fortunately, they were quickly turned away. The Reconstruction Committee had to shut the fireplace down temporarily and reinforce concealment charms on all entrances. They sent special commissioners to explain that what people had seen in Godric's Hollow was an attempt by Hogwarts, but an imperfect, non-reproducible magic. That didn't satisfy the outside factions, who demanded more concrete answers. But the professors were busy with the Green Flame Party, rescuing children. Who had time to explain arcane experiments to the nobility? The Cliff Street Committee had no choice but to order Hermione to stay home, to prevent her being kidnapped for questioning. They even arranged for Aunt Petunia to come to Harry's house and cook, so Hermione wouldn't be tempted to run around Cliff Street. Hermione's restocking mission to Malfoy Manor was abandoned for the time being. Denied direct access to Cliff Street, outside factions scoured the valley ruins, trying to recreate what they'd seen by magic. All they glimpsed through their spells was a dense, radiation-thick fog, terrifying and opaque. Whatever had happened inside remained a mystery. Then, before alternative plans could be formed, even more explosive news came from Eastern Europe. In the forests of Albania, Dumbledore and the Dark Lord had almost set the entire withered woods ablaze. Green flames clashed with golden-red fire in a scene that felt like the end of the world. Many younger wizards had grown up on stories of Dumbledore without ever seeing him in battle. Some had convinced themselves the stories were exaggerations. But when the sky swelled with that hard-to-clear red cloud, when a phoenix sang high over the forest, when Lord Voldemort was driven back into his lair and his lieutenants were broken outside, only then did they grasp the truth. The world's greatest white wizard was no myth. The one who could stand against the Dark Lord truly was different from other wizards. Faced with that display, the major powers, Malfoy Manor among them, lowered their tone. They stopped demanding immediate explanations from Cliff Street and were willing to wait patiently for the new student defense battle to end and for Dumbledore to finish his campaign. Days passed in a cautious calm. Harry and the others completed their homework perfectly without Hermione's help. Hermione herself failed to master invigorating perfume and the iron pot potion and could only promise to keep trying. Most of the new students had already been collected, and the professors could handle the few who remained. James went home alone. Harry would have to wait until term started to see his mother. Hogwarts was in good spirits. This year, there were over 40 new students, and Madame Pomfrey and Narcissa were kept tirelessly busy caring for them, but everyone's faces were bright with real smiles. It had been a long time since the school had been this full. The next day was the first day of term. Mr. James once again showed off his cooking, preparing a delicious farewell feast for the children. He slipped Harry a small square package with a conspiratorial look. "Open it only when you get to school," he instructed, winking. "And whatever you do, don't let your mother find out." Mr. Potter's reckless streak, it seemed, was as strong as ever. On the afternoon of September 1st, Hermione and her 3 companions returned to Hogwarts through the Floo network. Professor Lily was already in her office. Their summer homework, completed a few days earlier, lay neatly on the table. She didn't look tired or injured, proof that this year's troubles had been far less severe. "Very good. Everyone has reached the level I expected," she said kindly. "If you keep up this pace, getting an O in potions this year will be no problem." She pushed 3 small leather pouches across the desk toward Hermione and the boys. "This is the money you earned selling the potions you brewed over the summer, and the wages for the work you did for me. It isn't much," she added, but it will come in useful." Hermione flushed a little. "Professor, I'll pass. They did most of the work. I didn't contribute much." The repetitive brewing had been left to the boys. Hermione had been learning new concoctions or out with the exploration team. Her help on the higher-end brews had been small. Lily smiled. "The polyjuice potion you brewed in 1 month brought in a tidy sum. Don't refuse it. You deserve this." Hermione accepted, though reluctantly. Harry, who hadn't been given a pouch, immediately protested. "Mum, that's not fair. Why don't I have any?" Lily shot him an annoyed look. "What do you need money for? You won't be spending it at school." Then she eyed the bulge at Harry's waist. "And the invisibility cloak. While I won't take it from you, if any professor catches you out after curfew, you and your father will both be in trouble." Harry clutched the cloak in sudden alarm. There was more in that pocket than the cloak. Mr. James had slipped him a small present before they arrived, and Harry would have to wait until they reached the dormitory to open it. Leaving the potions office, the four of them walked toward the Great Hall for the opening feast. Students were arriving from every corridor and professor's office, popping out of fireplaces and chattering excitedly. The ancient castle had come back to life. This was Hermione's second year. She would now sit at the long table and watch the first years being sorted. Some of them had already been living in the castle for almost a week, but today they had to enter formally through the main doors. Voices near them broke into a familiar, teasing chorus. "Oh, my dear little brother, we didn't see you all summer. Did you miss your older brothers?" The Weasley twins had Ron in a two-handed hug from behind. He shoved them off and reddened. "We heard your wand broke. Was it because of the basilisk?" one of them teased. "Our brother must have been brave enough to fight a basilisk. This should be immortalized in song," the other added. Ron, mortified, swung at them and missed as they ducked with practiced ease. Percy, in time, intervened. "Ginny's still waiting outside for the sorting. Behave yourselves." Hermione remembered that Ginny was also starting school this year. Mrs. Molly Weasley had contributed so much to Gryffindor, motherly comfort and a formidable temper. Hermione glanced at the staff table. Professor Lockhart sat among the professors, smiling easily. A week of defending the new students had done much to endear him to the faculty. Dumbledore, as always, sat centrally and smiled benignly. Professor McGonagall performed much of the administrative heavy lifting, but for appearances and to reassure the wider wizarding world, it had been decided that Dumbledore would continue as the public face of the school. Students swapped summer stories. Professor McGonagall had taken a group to Warsaw, curiously described as not so much a city as a vast network of tunnels populated largely by Muggles. The underground was governed by a high council, and its law was rudimentary at best. Any race willing to pay the head tax could live there, but safety was far from guaranteed. There had been violent clashes, wizards against Muggles, goblins against wizards, so McGonagall had disguised the students as Muggles and taken them underground to observe the precarious coexistence up close. Firenze's Centaur team had visited the Sahara. Though dry and barren, it had largely escaped nuclear contamination. They had found an ever-flowing spring, discovered many magical creatures, and even captured a small tribe of warthogs. The money raised from these expeditions and projects had made the students beam, enough that everyone at the table felt a little richer. Soon, Professor McGonagall led the new students into the hall. There were more first years than usual. Hermione recognized Ginny in line, pulling faces at her brothers, and a mop of enthusiastic hair she'd seen in Cliff Street. Colin Creevey, the only orphan from Cliff Street to enroll this year. Colin had idolized Hermione ever since she'd helped in that fight. Though Lockhart had claimed the rescue, Colin had been dazzled by Hermione's courage and vowed to come to Gryffindor. As they were sorted, both Ginny and Colin went to Gryffindor. Hufflepuff again had the largest intake, but Slytherin's numbers had surprisingly outstripped Ravenclaw's. Many noble families, reassured by the school's renewed strength, had decided to send their children. Hermione caught sight of a pale, dreamy child, Luna Lovegood, at Ravenclaw's table. She moved like moonlight and seemed a little eccentric. Hermione amused herself with the thought that if Luna were to study full moon magic, perhaps she would progress incredibly fast. It was only a passing speculation. Hermione had no intention of pressing acquaintance on her. After the sorting, Dumbledore rose and tapped his goblet. A new year again, and things are looking up. He peered at the students and laughed softly. Looking at your faces, I feel years younger. First, he announced, let us welcome our new professor of reversal of anti-wizard techniques, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart. Applause swept the hall. Many of the students had read Lockhart's books. Many first years felt they owed their safety to him. Dumbledore continued, Professor Lockhart will also be Dean of Slytherin. The Slytherin table erupted in cheers. Lockhart, a Slytherin from Malfoy Manor, was their pride. Although he had declined the Manor's Platinum Knight's Medal after last week's events, the nobles were quick to praise him. And I think you'll like this, Dumbledore said, winking over his half-moon spectacles. We will resume the traditional Quidditch schedule. Starting the first week after term begins, Quidditch captains, your teams should start training. The hall exploded with cheers. Quidditch meant matches all year, and everyone thrilled at the prospect. Also, Dumbledore added, new student wand selection will take place the day after tomorrow. Your house deans will offer preliminary guidance. Ron and Neville, who'd been cheering, suddenly grew tense. Ginny and Colin beside them looked worried too. Dumbledore's speech closed shortly after with, enjoy the feast, and the tables filled with dishes. Hermione, uninterested in Quidditch, went straight for the food. This year, the grand feast seemed even more lavish, perhaps a sign of compensation from Malfoy Manor. Hermione tried charcoal-grilled pork chops for the first time. The smell and taste were overwhelming. There were caramel puddings, strawberry jellies, cauldron cakes. Hogwarts house elves had not had such a banquet for a long time. Ingredients flowed into dishes as if by magic, and even students from humbler homes, like the Potters, were in raptures. Little Colin watched Hermione's enthusiasm for the food with wide-eyed admiration and soon joined in. When at last they had eaten their fill, Hermione felt as if she'd swallowed a week. If tomorrow's meal is the same, I could do it again, she muttered. But before they could head back to their dormitories, two figures intercepted Hermione, Narcissa and Draco Malfoy. They looked pale and tense. Draco's cheeks, once ruddy from a summer in the castle, were a ghostly shade. We came to apologize, Narcissa said softly. Hermione remembered Dobby's attack. Since then, the house elf had not reappeared. Given his injuries, it was a miracle he had survived at all. Even if Dobby's resistance to radiation was stronger than a wizard's, he couldn't have launched another assault in so short a time. Narcissa had been questioned about the incident. Her family's Dobby had once been theirs, but she insisted they had no involvement. She had even taken and swallowed Veritaserum to prove her innocence. Draco, fidgeting, looked at Hermione. I'm sorry, Hermione, he stammered. He had been frightened since his encounters with more dangerous things. The fear hadn't abated into gratitude, only a colder restraint. This isn't your fault, Hermione said firmly. But Dobby's master is Lucius. I heard him say it myself. She did not soften. Even if he's imprisoned and Malfoy Manor denies it, I will remember this until the day of reckoning. Narcissa's eyes dropped. She looked as if she wanted to explain, but some lines could not be smoothed over with words. If Lucius had indeed ordered Dobby, she could not reconcile how her husband would choose such a path rather than escape and reunite with the family. But her confusion did not concern Hermione. Eager to get back to the dormitory and open the small gift Mr. James had given Harry, Hermione slipped away, her mind already shifting to tomorrow's wand selection and the long year ahead. Finally, Lights Out arrived. Not wanting to unfold the present in the common room where anyone might see it, Harry insisted they wait until most of the castle was asleep. He pulled the four of them into his dormitory, closed the door, and they crowded around the gift. Hermione had had to cast a disillusionment charm to sneak over to the boys' dormitory. Thankfully, it wasn't enchanted against boys, the way the girls' dormitory was. But that didn't stop one embarrassed stumble when a small boy got up to pee in the middle of the night. Under the three expectant pairs of eyes, Harry tore off the wrapping paper. Inside was a neat stack of white sheets, cleverly folded together. Blank paper? Ron said, puzzled, a question mark practically written across his face. You haven't been tricked by your dad, have you? Hermione's sharp eyes caught a slip of paper tucked in among the pages. Look, there's writing on this one. Harry read aloud the line written across it, baffled. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Try tapping the paper with your wand, Hermione said. Harry hesitated. He didn't want to risk tearing the delicate sheets with his wand, so instead he tapped very lightly with a finger. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. In the next instant, black ink began to spread from his fingertip. Lines sketched themselves across the paper until a detailed map of Hogwarts sprang into being. Hundreds of place names appeared, densely packed, corridors, classrooms, towers, and tiny names moved along the corridors, the professors on their rounds. Across the top, a neat line of text unfurled. Messrs. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, purveyors of aids to magical mischief makers, are proud to present the Marauders map. It should now be inherited by the new generation of Marauders. Use it well, and do not let the Marauders' name be tarnished. Then the writing faded. The four of them stared at one another with wide eyes. Marauders, Harry said, heart racing. I know, those were Dad and Sirius's nicknames at school. Ron was already on the move, excitement written all over him. Mooney's Lupin, he's a werewolf. Padfoot's Sirius, his animagus is a big dog. Prongs is Dad, his animagus is a stag. He paused. And Wormtail, Peter Pettigrew, his animagus is a rat. They were kicked out of the group after he betrayed them. Hermione remembered Harry mentioning the name and added it quietly, but everyone else was too thrilled to dwell on the awkwardness. Dad gave you the Marauders map because he wants us to be the next generation of Marauders, Ron crowed, pacing the dormitory. This is brilliant. With this, we'll never be afraid of getting caught on our night adventures again. Harry's adventurous spirit stirred at once. And there are so many secret passages. Our first-year night adventures were infant stuff compared to this. We didn't find anything. It was impossible not to notice how different James and Lily Potter's approaches to parenting must have been. For James, the measure of a proper Hogwarts childhood clearly included getting out after dark and exploring. I know one of those. There's a secret passage behind the fourth-floor mirror. Fred and George went through it, Ron said. Well, we know more than them now, Ron laughed. Neville, brimming with a quieter seriousness, reminded them, but all those passages were discovered by the previous Marauders. We're just inheriting their work. Exactly. Dad and the others spent 7 years exploring Hogwarts and made a magic thing as powerful as this map, Harry said, clenching a fist. We have to be even better. Ron frowned a little. But they were animagi. Except for Lupin, the other three were superb at transfiguration and weren't afraid to risk being caught on their night raids. Even with the invisibility cloak, it's not like it will hide four of us as we get older. Transfiguration isn't something you're born with, Hermione said, exasperation and something like hope both in her voice. You can learn it. That's right, Harry said, brightening. They learned animagus to help Lupin. Even Wormtail only managed it with help from Dad and the others. He looked at Hermione eagerly. Hermione, teach us to become animagi. Hermione's forehead twitched. Becoming an animagus was advanced magic. Even she was moving faster than most, but was nowhere near ready. And Professor McGonagall would never allow first or second years to attempt it for safety reasons. Honestly, it's not something I can teach, she said. You'll probably learn it faster from your dad and Sirius. They won't hold back, and once they know how, teaching you will be simple for them. Harry blinked. But I won't see them again until Christmas. What's the rush? You're only in second year. I doubt the original Marauders were animagi by their second year either. What you should focus on now is learning transfiguration properly, so when Dad and Sirius teach you, you already know the basics. Hermione's eyes were still on the map. Even if they ignored its obvious value for sneaking around, the map itself was an astonishing feat of magic. Precise tracking and revealing charms that had lasted more than 10 years without faltering. Look here, she said suddenly, pointing to a red ink blot marked on the map up near the 8th floor. Room of Requirement. Harry read the name out loud and his face lit up. Sirius mentioned that once. He said Dumbledore used it for Lupin on nights when he turned, so Lupin wouldn't hurt anyone. Dad and the others used it too. It's where they hid. Which means that's where their hideout was, Ron said breathlessly. Which means it could be our hideout. The children's enthusiasm for secret dens never dulled. Even Hermione felt the tug of curiosity. They say the room transforms to whatever the user needs, she said. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go see it now. Ron lunged for the invisibility cloak, about to pull them all out of the dormitory and off into the night. Hermione cut him off without mercy. Don't forget, you and Neville have Professor McGonagall's wandwork class in the morning. Ron and Neville froze. Hermione didn't need to say more. The last few days without wands had been a misery for Ron, and the thought of being tired and distracted for an important class was enough to sober them up. Ron pouted, but pleaded that they shouldn't go without him and Neville. A new generation of marauders couldn't be missing members. At last, they agreed to wait until they had their wands. The room of requirement would still be there. Hermione, watching Ron and Neville capitulate, couldn't help a small inward smile. And the thought that the name Marauders sounded ever so slightly ridiculous ran through her mind as they settled down for sleep. In the heart of Albania's forest, where an eternal green flame seemed to burn through the trees, a powerful wizard who could walk the layers of death's fire would find the secret realm behind the illusion. What had once been a Muggle church had been turned into Lord Voldemort's lair. The holy image of Jesus had been torn from its place and replaced by a sculpture of two coiling, self-devouring serpents. Green fire burned in braziers on either side, dyeing the whole church the color of emerald. Bones filled every corner. Benches had been assembled from leg bones. Chandeliers hung from skulls. The pulpit was a lattice of spines and ribs, and even the windowsills were narrow rows of arm bones. The bones were small. If one could have read their age, it would have been clear their original owners had been children, 11 or 12 years old. It was not only humans. Goblins and every other magical youngling the Death Eaters had found were killed and used to fill the place. At the church's center yawned a dry well, oddly seated indoors. A faint, eerie glow shone up from its mouth, the radiance so intense it could kill. Several black-robed figures lay prostrate around it, trembling and holding themselves still, silently enduring the well's corrosive influence rather than risk the master's wrath. After a time, a pale figure slowly rose out of the well and floated to a throne made of bone. So, having lost the basilisk, you are in such disarray? Lord Voldemort's voice was airy, like death drawing a black curtain. This year we lost a valuable asset. Lucius is useless, but with his help we could always steadily obtain large numbers of younglings. He drifted like a walking phantom to the crouched figures and bent over them. Barty, my son, the one who has always made me proud, how did you promise me? At the front, prostrate on the cold floor, was Barty Crouch Jr., once the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at Malfoy Manor, now reduced to something like a drowning stray. Whatever the cause, radiation, fear, shame, his face was contorted, sweat pouring down. Voldemort continued, voice flat with scorn. You promised double. You said that without Lucius you could still bring back twice as many children as before. Barty stammered, But, Father, there are still children on the way. We found. The plea was cut off as the Crucio slammed into him. He convulsed and went rigid. New student enrollment has ended. Those children you scavenged from Muggle settlements, those who supposedly triggered extraordinary phenomena, are merely the products of foolish Muggle gossip. They fear magic, just as wizards fear me. Voldemort's expression was cold. Muggles are worthless. Throwing them into the well is a waste. Barty forced himself up and knelt anew. Even under the lingering pain of the curse, his body shook like a sieve, but he strained to stay on his knees. I'm sorry, Father. I have disappointed you. The other Death Eaters watched, terrified and breathless. If even Barty, the favored son, had been made to suffer so, none could guess what further wrath might follow. If you hadn't foolishly let Lockhart abduct the children, if you hadn't turned back to Malfoy Manor and been besieged by Hogwarts, Voldemort said coldly, the basilisk would not have been so badly wounded, and we wouldn't have lost so many. Even if Dumbledore were to return, you would not have been defeated time and again by the Order of the Phoenix. I only wanted to spread your dread and make your name feared, Barty croaked. Foolish, Voldemort spat, and the Crucio intensified again. Barty writhed and crawled, screaming and twisting on the stone floor. Fear is only the dewdrop on the flower of death. It makes us powerful, but it cannot grant us immortality." The great bone door of the church swung open. Severus Snape entered, his usual sullen face as unreadable as ever, and behind him staggered Bellatrix Lestrange. One of her arms and a leg had been shattered during the last assault on Hogwarts and had been restored by dark arts. The replacements were not flesh, but something like glass or smoky quartz threaded with black veins, wicked and beautiful. "Master, the basilisk and Bella's injuries have both been tended," Snape said, bowing slightly and taking his place beside Voldemort. Voldemort reached out and stroked Bellatrix's face. She gasped and raved with adoration, utterly devoted despite the shredded body of her husband Rodolphus kneeling behind Barty, ignored. A vast snake's shadow coiled outside the church, hissing. Firelight from beyond the trees threw chaotic patterns through the stained glass. With a sudden motion, Voldemort smashed a skull beside him. "Dumbledore, that old ghoul who won't die," he muttered. "He clearly has one foot in death, so how can he return before me in full force? No, the scent of death clings to him. He is more like an inferius than a man." He was not chiefly angry about Barty's failure. If fewer children were captured, other magical creatures, mutated beasts, or goblins could be substituted. What unsettled him was Dumbledore's continuing presence. Voldemort had chosen paths at odds with Dumbledore's methods precisely because he refused to become like him, and now Dumbledore was, in some way, thriving where Voldemort expected him to be defeated. "Perhaps the Philosopher's Stone?" Snape suggested quietly. "They have rediscovered a means to renew it." The Caro siblings who knelt farther back offered other theories. "Unicorns," one said. "They found extinct unicorns and used their blood to extend Dumbledore's life." "Maybe Dumbledore has a well," Bellatrix said, and her words sent a chill through the assembled Death Eaters. They all looked toward the glowing, bone-filled well behind Voldemort. It was denser with bones than any other part of the church. "I need someone to uncover Dumbledore's secret," Voldemort said softly. Barty crawled forward and pressed his lips to Voldemort's feet. "Father, please entrust it to me. I will not disappoint you this time." Voldemort looked at his supplicant and inclined his head. "I hope you live up to your word." Then he turned to the Caro siblings. "Lockhart has caused us more trouble than I expected. Go kill him and take the basilisk." The siblings bowed. "Master, he teaches at Hogwarts. We may not be enough." Voldemort glanced at them and halted. Without Mundungus Fletcher's help, it was indeed hard to find Hogwarts' exact location. He had been able to ambush the school before only because they had captured Mundungus and used his methods to bypass powerful concealments. He raised his hand, and two small skeletons detached themselves from the bone piles, flying through the air to join together. With a flick, he breathed life into them. The bones knit and polished until two ghostly little girls stood side by side, expressionless, their eyes empty. Voldemort's wand poured a cold, ceaseless curse into the bones. "Lockhart's two elder sisters," he said. "I did not expect these useless remains to be of use again. He will be very willing to risk his life for them." A terrible, almost fond smile crossed his face. "Do not let Lockhart die easily. I want him to suffer so thoroughly that even from Albania I can hear people discussing the cruelty of his end." "And that Hermione Granger," he added. "Shining stone magic is interesting, but it is a pity we didn't capture her before. Kill her as well." He turned back to Bellatrix and Snape. "You two will take the rest and hunt for other magical younglings. Be they beasts or goblins. Do not disappoint me as Barty did." 97. Faith in Trouble. Hogwarts moved at its own unhurried pace, now well into Italian territory after the start of the school year. This year's wand selection site had been set in Rome, specifically the ruined Vatican, once a refuge where Muggles had swarmed during the war. Now the place lay in ashes. In the early days of the war, wizards had been shocked by the Muggles' sudden use of nuclear bombs. By the time they recovered, magic's ability to infiltrate minds and systems had already blinded the Muggles. Goblins could help identify targets, but there were far fewer goblins than wizards. They could not shoulder the task alone. Spells like Confundo and Imperio made it easy to locate hidden military bases and turn commanders into instruments of their own destruction, or bolder wizards would apparate with an armed bomb over a city and vanish, leaving the device to detonate. When such weapons began to be used indiscriminately, the world slipped into widespread nuclear contamination. The Vatican, as a religious city, had drawn countless Muggles at the war's outset. Many believed Christian teachings and thought wizards agents of the devil. They sought sanctuary in that holy place. Nearly 1 million people poured into Rome, and only the most fortunate squeezed into the Vatican itself. Then nuclear bombs detonated mercilessly above Peter's Square. Their God did not protect them. Tens of thousands gathered there, praying, queuing for food, clutching one another in terror, and most were turned to ash in the purifying fire. Even in a war of apocalypse, that was a singular tragedy. Hogwarts' destination was precisely that ruined city. After using the Philosopher's Stone to clear the radiation, the students could safely comb the wreckage for materials imbued with faith and meaning. Objects blessed or treasured by so many, which often held strong magical properties and made excellent wand cores or handles. There were a lot of children this year, over 40 new students, plus Ron and Neville in their second year, and several others rescued at Christmas. Except for Daphne, who still used the decorative wand she had bought at Malfoy Manor, most of them chose to take part in the wand selection, bringing the total to more than 50. The staff were stretched thin, so Hogwarts mobilized seventh years to assist. They were nearly as capable as adult wizards, and helping professors clear hazards both inside and outside the city was not difficult. Malfoy Manor's compensation from the previous year had supplied enough brooms too. Pairing a professor with an older student so each could carry a child meant transport was not a problem. Early that morning, Harry went with Ron and the others to wait in the courtyard. Hermione did not join them. She had stayed in the Philosopher's Stone Hall on the 4th floor to work with Dumbledore and ensure the stone's stability. In earlier years, when the theory behind the stone was less developed, Hogwarts had limited itself to absorbing radiation in places like Chernobyl. True nuclear blast zones were too dangerous to attempt. This year, though, after Hermione's successful work in Godric's Hollow over the summer, they had chosen Rome, a city devastated by nuclear fire. "If this works, you'll give yourself even more trouble," Dumbledore said, watching as the stone hummed under his influence. Beside him sat the Mirror of Erised, enchanted to show the scene outside the castle. The image reflected the massive school making landfall on high ground at the city's edge, pausing to look southeast over a scorched, abandoned Rome. The buildings were slightly more intact than in Godric's Hollow, but not by much. Farther east, the Colosseum stood like a broken tombstone, more than half collapsed. In the Vatican district, the surviving structures were blackened. Only a few stubborn, radiation-resistant dwarf plants crawled over the ruined streets and houses. Dumbledore guided the stone gently, drawing the radiation from around the castle up into its spire, turning the flow into a fine, steady stream that dripped into the stone. His control was far more precise than Hermione's. She could crudely absorb surrounding radiation, but not direct it in a way imperceptible to everyone nearby. He smiled. If those nobles can be called trouble. Because Godric's Hollow had been exposed, many wizard enclaves grew restless, but Dumbledore would not be sidetracked. Using Malfoy Manor's previous isolation and its refusal to help as an excuse, he told would-be envoys that he had no time to mediate their quarrels and focused instead on his students and professors. The nobles grumbled, but were forced to accept it. Hogwarts was difficult to find. Dumbledore was powerful, and Malfoy Manor could only send supplies. Their envoys could not even enter the headmaster's office. But Hermione, Dumbledore asked as he continued to manipulate the magic, if this ritual for clearing radiation can truly be replicated, would you be willing to make it public? Hermione did not look up from the radiant core she tended. I don't mind my magic spreading, she said. But Professor, the essence of this ritual is that it gathers radiation to form an extraordinarily powerful Philosopher's Stone. And for the stone's structural stability, Dumbledore finished, this magic will turn it into a self-circulating core. It will continually draw in surrounding power and produce energy. It won't be consumed by use, and even if it is temporarily depleted, it will recover. A powerful stone, like the one at Hogwarts, could be more terrifying than a nuclear bomb because it can be used again and again. Are the leaders of those wizard enclaves fit to possess such a thing? Hermione asked. Dumbledore fell silent. He knew the nobles better than she did, greedier than Muggle capitalists, less principled than devils. Their alliance with the White Wizards had more to do with the absence of alternative power than any shared ideals. In a world ordered by might, wizards would rule over Muggles, and the strong would dominate the weak. If those people obtained even a lesser version of the Hogwarts stone, they could become tyrants, committing new atrocities. They might conspire to seize full ownership of a stone, and if thwarted, they might resort to destroying it in a mad, catastrophic attempt, recreating a nuclear explosion. At that point, the nobles would be trouble in earnest, Dumbledore said. He glanced into the mirror of Erised again. Professors and older students had already carried children out of the castle and into the ruins in an orderly fashion, landing in scattered pairs across the city. Dumbledore sighed softly. Never mind. Perhaps we can wait a little longer. Beside him, Hermione watched the glowing core with quiet intensity, correcting the smallest deviations as they occurred. She looked exceptionally steady and reliable in that moment. 98. Wand identification. Thanks to the presence of so many professors and older students, this year's wand selection passed without incident. As the pupils blew their whistles and were led back, Hermione said goodbye to Dumbledore and made her way to the courtyard. She had promised Ron and the others she would use her sky eye to help identify the materials of their wands. Children might find the wand that suited them by instinct, but that dusty, battered stick might mean nothing to them unless someone could explain what it had once been. Neville and Ginny were the first to be brought back, their robes surprisingly clean. Hermione took Neville's wand first. A sword? No, just a scabbard, she muttered. The scabbard felt heavy in her hand, a low-key, silver-gray metal covered with floral and vine patterns. It was much heavier than it looked, and she felt the impression of some liquid sloshing inside. Even when she turned it upside down, nothing poured out. A magical seal apparently closed the opening, though the silver liquid within could be glimpsed. Mercury, Hermione said, one of the 3 sacred elements of alchemy. No wonder it's so heavy. Neville scratched his head. I first saw a sword, long and straight. I thought it would be useful. Before he could finish, Hermione's sky eye activated on its own. Images and moments cascaded through her mind, and she sifted quickly for the important bits. This sword was made for a French Muggle noble, but the blade itself never had any great value. The scabbard used to house part of the holy sword Durandal. After the relic was lost, a noble who came into possession of the scabbard had a sword custom-made to fit it. She turned back to the silver liquid. The mercury came from a clumsy alchemist, really a charlatan Muggle who'd tried to practice medicine in a crowded, plague-ridden city. He didn't understand true alchemy, but with what little he knew, he saved many lives. With a scabbard that once held a holy sword for its body and mercury, the healing yet poisonous element for its core, your wand symbolizes inward transformation. It's specialized for defensive and healing magic. But beware, mercury's toxicity is real. While sealed in the scabbard, it'll do good, but if it gushes out, it can be deadlier than any blade. Neville beamed as he took his wand. The other students looked on with envy. Their wands might be strange and meaningful too, but without Hermione's explanations, the stories behind the materials would remain mysteries. Ginny was impatient to have her wand back. Hers looked more conventional, a pure black metal rod, longer than most, about 16 inches, with a bright red tint at the tip as though stained with blood. Hermione touched it, and the sky eye opened. The body is a gun barrel, she said. It belonged to a non-commissioned officer who brought his wife here to hide. During the chaos and hunger that swept the city, he used this weapon to fend off attackers, but in the end, both he and his wife died in a nuclear blast. Hermione blinked at the wand core. The core is a rose, preserved in ice. A bishop kept it in the deepest part of an ice cellar. Muggles use deep freezing to preserve things they hope for in the future. It's a combination of violence and love. Fiery power runs through it, but it also yearns for peace. It will be very suitable for you. Ginny grinned, and though she had not yet learned formal magic, lightly waved the wand. A delicate rose bloomed in a dribble of frost from the tip. Colin was the third to return. He had been waiting so long, he practically shoved his wand into Hermione's hands. She examined it, a paintbrush, its bristles stained with color. The Sky Eye showed her the painter who'd fled here, and a tiny sealed bottle of agave, the kind of spirit a sailor might carry, embedded in the brush. The agave seeped down into the bristles and mixed with pigments, transforming the strokes. Passion and imprinting, Hermione said, surprised. Your wand wants to create and leave marks. I didn't expect you to like painting. Colin smiled sheepishly. His settlement had bordered the ruins of the city in the old art museum. He had seen oil paintings abandoned and reused as trash. Ron had not returned yet, and students clustered around Hermione, pleading for readings of their own wands. It was good practice for her Sky Eye, and she obliged, picking their stories out one by one. Every wand had a history, grand or small. The memories and people could condense into materials that bore magic. By dusk, Ron staggered back, caked with dust from wherever he had been. A small round shield was strapped to his arm. On its face, carved in the white stone, was a weeping Madonna. Hermione raised an eyebrow. Using a shield as a wand body was rare. Ron handed it over. The Sky Eye showed her a collapsed statue of the Weeping Maria and a frozen instant of a man turning his back to a nuclear blast, shielding a child in his arms. Both had died soon after from fever and radiation. The body of your wand comes from devoted faith, Hermione said. That statue was prayed over by countless people who begged the Holy Mother for peace and sustenance. The core comes from a father's backbone, a man who worked hard to support his family and used his back to bear hope for the child he held. Protection and belief, she concluded. Like this shield, it will be excellent for defensive magic. She turned the shield over and saw a white bone grip set into the inner handle. It will bolster your shield charms. Weapons alloyed with demon core metal will probably find it difficult to penetrate. Ron nodded, suddenly shy. Weren't you the one who taught Harry to use magical weapons before? There was a magic shield, wasn't there? Could I learn that too? Hermione did not refuse. After the basilisk incident, Ron had grown a great deal and shown new resolve. She thought he might suit practicing high-difficulty shield counters. She agreed to teach him. 99. Room of Requirement. Hermione quickly revised her earlier opinion of Ron. As soon as they finished choosing wands, he, apparently unaffected by a day's worth of walking through the ruins, insisted they go look for the Room of Requirement that very night. He was still full of energy even with classes in the morning. Harry and Neville were easily convinced. None of them wanted to postpone. So after lights out, Hermione slipped out of the common room with them. She wanted to see the room that was said to appear to anyone who truly needed it. Their new wands were already making a difference. Ron and Neville had both improved noticeably in control. Hermione no longer had to do everything herself. Ron cheerfully cast levitation charms to make them float along. Neville kept the invisibility cloak aloft so it draped over the four of them, and Harry led the way with the Marauders map, watching the names scurry across the parchment. With the map and the cloak, night walks were far safer. Without Hermione's vigilance, they could still spot a professor on a corridor or staircase and slip away in time. And with the Potter family's invisibility cloak, Hogwarts at night seemed hardly defended against the four of them. They reached the 8th floor without incident, before the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy being mauled by trolls. "This is it," Harry said, eager. "Think of the room you need. Walk up and down in front of this wall 3 times, and the door to the Room of Requirement will appear. We need to find the room the Marauders used." He pulled his cloak back and paced in front of the stone. Sure enough, after 3 passes, a large door slid silently out of the wall. It worked! Ron pushed the door open impatiently. A huge, dust-choked room was revealed. It was cavernous, but aside from a big bed in the corner, there was only a round table with 4 chairs. The rest of the space was filled with cabinets and towering piles of miscellaneous things. On top of the cabinets were odd devices and instruments, all thickly coated in dust, lit by the pearly light from the tower windows. "Cough! Cough! Cleanse!" Ron croaked, overhead. He snapped his fingers and sent the dust swirling away, proud to show off his new wand. They all went in and closed the door. Hermione lit the candles on the table and the chandelier, and they split up to explore. This was Dad's in their base back then. Harry breathed. That bed must be for Lupin, Neville said. He'd be exhausted after turning back, would need to rest. Look, busted cheating quills. They even worked on those. Ron picked up a broken quill. By Merlin, this is a whole production line for dung bombs. What were Dad and the others doing at school? Harry pointed at a set of apparatus in disbelief. Who in their right mind sets up a mass production line for dung bombs in a school? Neville held up a badge split clean down the middle, its design showing a mountain, 2 pentagrams, and a short sword on a shield flanked by 2 greyhounds. The cut was unnaturally smooth, like the work of powerful magic. This is the Black family crest, Ron said at once. I heard Dad say that after their godfather ran away from home, he was disowned by the Blacks. Harry nodded. This must be where Sirius started breaking with his family. But his animagus is a black dog. Do dogs have some special meaning for the Blacks? Neville asked. Thinking of those noble faces at Malfoy Manor, it's a good thing Sirius got away, Ron grumbled. The Black family isn't exactly like other noble houses, Neville said more seriously. They were one of the Sacred 28. I heard my dad say that they had influence in the Wizengamot, and they didn't even live at Malfoy Manor. Even so, they valued pure blood, Neville went on. They believed their blood carried power, that being born noble meant you were meant to rule. That's why they swore allegiance to the dark side and stood with those who wanted to dominate. But at the Quidditch last year, Regulus Black was sitting in the Slytherin stands. We saw him, Ron protested. Malfoy Manor doesn't represent every Slytherin. Neville fumbled a little, trying to explain. Regulus was the last Black to come to Hogwarts. After him, most of the family sent their children to Durmstrang. You're saying they were keeping alliances open, Hermione suggested. Nobles always hedge their bets. The Black family's old status could make them a bridge between places like Malfoy Manor and institutions like the Wizengamot. It's not surprising. But if they gave up easy dominance over Muggles to join Grindelwald's faction, they must have wanted more, Harry said. Maybe they didn't want to be local rulers. They wanted to be the rulers of the world. In practical terms, Malfoy Manor and the Wizengamot don't look that different. Both control Muggles, Ron complained. What's the real difference? Adults always use vague words, Harry said, scratching his head. Maybe we'll understand in a few years. In a few years, Hermione said softly. Who knows? We might even meet the Wizengamot on a battlefield. The room grew quiet. There were no large-scale wars, not yet, but that didn't mean conflicts between wizards, Muggles, and goblins had stopped. Small skirmishes flared wherever people lived. Muggles feared and resented wizards. Some blamed goblins for events, blamed them and each other for turning the world into something dangerous. Goblins, in turn, distrusted all humans and plotted to further their own ends. Wizards were split. Dumbledore and Grindelwald had their opposing camps. Wherever Grindelwald's supporters marched, shadow black fiendfire consumed all. The Order of the Phoenix, though it seldom confronted them directly, often tried to put out the flames and curb their brutality. The 4 of them, and certainly Hermione, were likely, in time, to clash with those who followed the new order. It wasn't impossible that they'd face the Wizengamot or its allies someday. When that time comes, I'll show those Durmstrang brats that Hogwarts is the best school for magic, Harry said, slapping the chain scythe at his waist with a grin. You should learn your father's animagus form first, Hermione said, pulling a thick stack of notes from a cabinet. The pages were neat and dense with writing. No wonder Uncle James never offered to teach you. They left all their notes here. They're very detailed, from the basics up through the hard parts. Hermione beamed. Animagus was an advanced form of human transfiguration, and there were almost no proper guides outside of careful teaching by someone like Professor McGonagall, who wouldn't teach such things lightly. The Marauders' notes, though, were thorough. Alongside the brilliant entries by James and Sirius were simpler explanations meant for Peter, who wasn't as quick. The notes even pointed out obscure pitfalls to help him learn. These papers would be the fastest way for the new group to master animagus. Even if Ron and Neville weren't prodigies, the notes were written to help the slower students, like Pettigrew once had been. Forget everything else, Ron said, eyes shining. If we learn animagus, we'll ace 7th-year transfiguration. 100 second-year courses. The next morning, during Transfiguration, Ron and Neville appeared in front of Hermione, bright-eyed and energetic, as if nothing had happened the night before. Hermione could only sigh. Boys seemed to have a different kind of energy for night adventures, one that didn't affect them the next day. Professor McGonagall distributed new textbooks. Though Hermione had read Cedric's old edition the previous year, the new volume contained many additions and deletions, so she planned to reread it carefully. More importantly, Professor Lockhart had added several new sections to the Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook, and Hermione had been looking forward to those for a long time. After she finished the new book, she intended to borrow the Weasley twins' fourth-year textbooks and the Transfiguration notes left by the Marauders. With that reading schedule, at least until Halloween, she would be fully occupied. Second-year Transfiguration had already grown noticeably harder, but Hermione was still the first to finish the task McGonagall set. The professor smiled and added 5 points to Gryffindor. "I think you can begin trying human transfiguration now," she said. "I know George and Fred will lend you their books, but if you need higher-grade texts, I don't mind asking Cedric." Hermione lowered her voice. "Professor, we found Harry's father's transfiguration notes from when he was here." McGonagall's expression changed. She leaned down so only Hermione could hear and spoke gravely. "Promise me, if you intend to attempt animagus transformations, you must come to me first. Do you understand?" As Hermione's former professor, and now an ally, McGonagall understandably worried. She knew James Potter and his friends had been animagi, and she was proud that her students might aspire to such difficult magic for the sake of friendship. But Hermione was only in her second year. Becoming an animagus demanded extraordinary mental control. One small mistake could mean never changing back. Hermione nodded vigorously. She had no plans to rush into human transfiguration. She wanted to finish reading the twins' books first. Also, until you have mastered it completely, you mustn't teach Harry and the others. McGonagall added, glancing at Ron's flower pot, which was bristling with mouse whiskers and making her veins stand out in anger. Still, Ron was doing much better than last semester since getting his new wand. His transfigurations had become far more stable. Neville had a longer way to go. He'd missed too much the previous year. Harry, perhaps inheriting skill from his father, performed better than Draco and even raised an eyebrow at him in challenge, while Draco barely bothered to reply. Potions that afternoon was a showcase for the Gryffindor quartet. Having had private tutoring from Professor Potter all summer, even Neville, slowest of the four, was at least half a year ahead of most of his classmates. Whether Hermione and Harry worked together or Ron and Neville paired up, they brewed the pixie potion with a high degree of success. Lily warned them, however, that it was only a warm-up for the term. If they couldn't brew a Skelegro that satisfied her for the final exam, she would still give them a full tea for potions. By the end of the first day, Gryffindor already held a comfortable lead in house points. Last year, Lucius Malfoy had lavished points on Draco, but this time the quartet had genuinely earned theirs through excellent work. The others could grumble about favoritism, but they had little recourse. After dinner, Harry and his friends planned to go on to the Room of Requirement to tidy the Marauders' old hideout, but Hermione opted to stay and read in the common room. She wanted to review the second-year Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook before tomorrow's first class, Reversals and Counter-Curses, which she'd been looking forward to. The night passed quickly, and she was the first to arrive in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, determined to greet Professor Lockhart at her best. "I think she's truly obsessed. Lockhart won't know what hit him," Ron muttered, which earned him a sharp tap on the head from Hermione's book. Students trickled in, and Lockhart swept through the door in his usual manner, wrapped in a blue-gray cloak, hair immaculate and shining like spun gold. The sword at his waist and the short staff on his back were spotless, clearly polished for the occasion. "Good morning, children, and welcome to second-year Defense Against the Dark Arts," he announced in a long, practiced breath. "I am your new professor, Gilderoy Lockhart." He sounded rehearsed, even a little nervous at first, but he relaxed into the performance quickly. "Some of you may already know of my work," he said, giving Hermione and her friends a wink. If you paid attention in last year's classes, I shouldn't be entirely unfamiliar. Yes, I authored the textbook in your hands, and the points you see there are drawn from my personal adventures. Professor, did you really cross the Muggle front lines and rescue a witch through a hail of bullets? A curious girl called out. Ah, yes, that was 5 years ago in Vilnius, Lockhart replied smoothly. I observed what Muggles call combined arms tactics, heavy steam tanks and infantry in anti-wizard gear advancing steadily and tearing apart a ghost forest constructed by local wizards. He smiled broadly. Though through the firestorm I was forced to be a hero isn't the textbook for you young ones. Another admirer is flattering, but it's a bit advanced for second years. Professor, in A Year with the Tibetan Yeti, you mentioned the pure land of Shambhala. Does the Earth axis really exist? Another boy asked. Lockhart cocked his head. Oh, child, I suspect there was too much confundo used on Hitler, or perhaps other factors. At least on that plateau, I did not find any such axis. He pouted theatrically. Don't rush. We'll address those topics in later lessons. From me, you will learn a world richer than what the pages alone show. Perhaps that is why Dumbledore invited me here. And to keep an eye on the Slytherins, a classmate piped up, drawing glares from Draco and his cronies. Well, that might be one of the reasons, Lockhart admitted with a laugh, then motioned for attention. More than the specifics in the book, what I want you to grasp is the current state of the world. You can learn from texts how to counter a goblin's curse, exploit a vampire's weakness, or pass as a qualified Muggle. But perhaps more important is knowing where the dangers lie today. In every class from now on, besides the textbook material, I will explain the distribution of forces among the Wizengamot, Muggles, and Goblins. That kind of knowledge might not be as neat as what's in books, but it is just as vital, and it may save you from having to use the spells you learn there. Hermione sat rapt. Since arriving in this world, apart from Godric's Hollow and Malfoy Manor, she had never truly understood the wider world. Hogwarts seemed to walk in the cracks between realities. The outside rarely intruded. That had left her unfamiliar with much beyond the castle. A teacher who had traveled as Lockhart could fill in those gaps, and she intended to listen closely.